You won't stop telling us stories about that damn reactor.
I've heard so many awesome stories
Huh?
from this guy.
Sentiment
Such
has
a
reached the
fan.
fever pitch in the city. As more
all
information
need to
about
help
Epilogue
Midgar.
is coming to light. And amid this
Hello, and welcome back to Video Games. I'm Tim Rogers. You are watching the Action Button review of the Final Fantasy VII Remake. For those afraid to watch in full, let us begin with the bottom line. The Final Fantasy VII Remake is more Final Fantasy VII than Final Fantasy VII. For those who remain, indulge me with the opportunity to deliver an extended introduction. I mean, this is the first video in this series, and I feel like it's quite important to talk to you about my process. Look at it this way. If I tell you about my process now, then I don't have to tell you about it next time. This video represents the first in a series which may very well continue until the end of my mortal life. I make this declaration without cynicism. As a human person who just 11 months previous passed the threshold into their 40th year of life, crossing over into that much ballyhooed 5th decade and unto the precipice of middle age, the darkness with which I reckon my building past acquired a richer sheen of morbidity. I first reviewed a video game in front of the amusement of the internet at large literally 19 years ago. My calculator tells me that's almost half my life ago, though I have, in the ensuing life half, embarked upon and nearly died during many adventures. Though I have wormed my way into and eaten my fill of several careers inside and around the various entertainment industries of the world, I have somehow never failed to, usually accidentally, review a video game in public every once in a predictable while. A man who used to sign my paychecks at a Fortune 500 company once told me that a man in his 20s brags about women he's slept with. A man in his 40s brags about meals he's eaten. And a man in his 60s brags about his bowel movements. I replied to this man with an enthusiastic immediacy which might have shocked him, that he was saying a man in his 20s brags about what he's put himself into, a man in his 40s brags about what he's put into himself, and a man in his 60s brags about what he has left behind. The old man shook his head and told me I'd misunderstood the metaphor. Back then, I figured maybe he was right, and I just lacked the perspective to understand why. Today, I declare with confidence that he was wrong. I was 25 years old then, and I knew a lot more about everything than that old man. He is literally dead now, and I'm in charge. In my 20s, I put myself into the task of reviewing video games for my website, actionbutton.net. In my 40s, today, I come to you having sucked the Final Fantasy VII Remake down with a milkshake straw. And on my eventual 60th birthday, one of you watching this right now will take my place. Let these videos, then, serve as an education for you, my eventual successor. Back in the early 2000s, while I was working at Sony Computer Entertainment Japan in Tokyo, I reviewed video games in my spare time on my website, actionbutton.net. It started as a freak exercise in passive-aggressively smack-talking the free games I received at my job. It eventually evolved into a dreadfully complicated procedure of note-taking, replaying, and data analysis. Thanks in large part to this laborious hobby of mine, I received an eclectic self-education, one which propelled me into a job designing for AAA video games. Even when I founded my own studio, Action Button Entertainment, I did not abandon this curious hobby. In fact, the complexity of my bizarre pastime only blossomed thanks to emerging technologies such as video capture. When my Action Button Entertainment colleagues Brent Porter, Michael Kerwin, and Nicholas Wazalewski's game Video Ball failed to recoup the 4 game profits' worth of investment we'd gambled into it, I swore to take a 3-year sabbatical. I determined to spend 3 years analyzing games again, owning my skills toward the scarcest possibility of epiphany. Here I express my sincerest gratitude to Kotaku.com editor-in-chief Stephen Totillo for hiring me as a video content creator. For 3 years, I enjoyed a pay-checkered opportunity to tunnel deeper into the design language of video games than I ever had. Today, I come to you with 2 promises. That we at Action Button Entertainment will make our game Truckheck, and that I have achieved the maximum level possible of video game critical and analytical faculties. Introducing the Action Button method for video game analysis. This newly refined process represents an evolution of a method I've utilized for various AAA clients over the past decade. However, seeing as you all are already paying me $10,000 per month, you collectively represent one AAA client. For most of the games I review on this channel, I will conduct the same process. I spend 8 days playing a video game 12 hours a day, striving to complete it as many times as possible. While playing, I have thoughts and take notes. I arrange those notes into a rough review outline. Then, I divide my captured video footage of 96 hours of gameplay into Adobe Premiere sequences representing what I have ascertained to be the stages of a game. I spend 7 12-hour days watching and rewatching the most important sequences of that footage. For the sake of the Final Fantasy VII Remake, for example, I scrutinized 2 full playthroughs, my first and my fourth. While watching, I separate each sequence of video footage into color-coded channels representing different varieties of moment. This allows me to then easily compose what I call a structure atlas. While color-coding each sequence of footage, I take extensive log notes. I refer back and forth between the log notes and my rough script outline. I flesh out the outline with any new observations I make while rewatching my footage. When I have completed 7 full days of logging, I then spend 3 days performing various data analyses on my prepared video footage sequences. The results of my number crunching work their way into my script outline. With the data analysis and my script outline complete, I then spend 2 days on the fun part, during which I bury my scientific and analytical findings under a dirt mountain of fancy prose idiot jokes. I then spend 1 day filming and editing a reading of the script, and 4 days assembling the video. Thus and so, after 25 12-hour days, that's 300 hours of work, the Action Button method for video game analysis is complete, and a video review program consisting of no less than 60 meticulously scripted and edited minutes of content arrives on your television. Yes, I said television. If you happen to watch this on your phone, under no circumstances are you permitted to tell me that you did that. I actually recommend watching Action Button reviews on a game console with a game controller in hand, because occasionally during the video editing process my self-restraint mechanisms temporarily fail me, and at those times I will put onto the screen more text than any existing human can comfortably read in the allotted time. In these cases, I encourage you to consider whichever button on your video game controller pauses the playback on your video game console's video playing application, the Action Button. Press the Action Button and enjoy your Easter egg. If you miss, you are not permitted to rewind. If you rewind, you are not permitted under any circumstances to tell me that you did that. You know, I'm glad I took the time to outline my process before this video of all the videos I could possibly make, because now I get to confess to you that I definitely chose the absolute worst possible game for this, the first episode of the Action Button Review video series program. The Final Fantasy VII Remake is not just a role-playing game, a genre already known for its generous and voluminous length. The Final Fantasy VII Remake is also a new role-playing game, one which I had never played prior to the launch of this video project. Not only is the Final Fantasy Remake a new RPG, it is a new RPG whose chiefest of aims is to recreate every molecule of sentimental magic installed in my brain 23 years ago by a game whose nostalgia hooks tear deeper into my memory flesh with every terrible passing day. Reviewing this game, of all games, as the first game to review in my series reviewing games, upon which I am staking my career and credibility by publicly submitting to the funding whims of a crowd, represents a massively challenging Hail Mary gesture of either Herculean dedication or reprehensible stupidity. One might say the challenge I faced in reviewing this game was not exactly unlike that faced by Hironobu Sakaguchi and his compatriots at Squaresoft when they developed a little game called Final Fantasy back in 1987. Nonetheless, and to the apocalyptic disappointment of my enemies, I have prevailed, locked in a microscopic apartment during a miniature Armageddon, during which all the local laundromats are closed, and the gas has been out in my building for 3 months, reduced to doing laundry in the cold shower, while overcoming 3 weeks of sickness with the world's most famous coronavirus, despite Domino's Pizza's refusal to answer the phone or take online orders. Even though my TV broke while I was doing so, I performed 200 hours of work, in the process puncturing the stratosphere of sentimentality, turning this particular decade's-yearned media product into, quote, a game I have played, unquote. I'm telling you, I drank the Final Fantasy VII Remake with a milkshake straw. I loved every second of the experience. And then I spent an additional 100 hours taking that game apart, one molecule at a time, in a desperate attempt to learn how to hate it. How did I do? You tell me, cowboy. And with that, we can at last begin the action button review of the Final Fantasy VII Remake, a video game published by Square Enix for the Sony PlayStation 4 computer entertainment system on Friday, April 10th, 2020, based on the 1997 Squaresoft game Final Fantasy VII, produced by Yoshinori Kitase, directed by Tetsuya Nomura, Naoki Hamaguchi, and Motomu Toriyama, with music by Masashi Hamauzu, Mitsuto Suzuki, and Nobuo Uematsu. Many questions concerning the Final Fantasy VII Remake entered my various electronic inboxes even before I began composing this review. Do I need to have played the original Final Fantasy VII in order to enjoy the remake? Is most of those questions. It turns out that no critic of video games can talk about a video game without needing to talk about other video games. Much as I'd like to talk about the Final Fantasy VII Remake as though it existed in a vacuum, I cannot resist your numerous similar questions. Nor can I resist the lure of my own memories. Nor can I resist the Final Fantasy VII Remake's sinisterly sticky sweet inclination toward temptation to ponder every god-darn video game that has ever existed. In summary, it took me 200 hours to arrive at an answer to your questions. Spoilers! I think you should play the original Final Fantasy VII before you play the remake. And, in a shocking turn of events, I earnestly believe that you should play the Final Fantasy VII Remake before you play the Final Fantasy VII Remake. Now you might ask, what do I mean by that? Well, take a look at the length of this video, buddy. That should be your first clue that the answer to that question is going to kill at least one of us. Because you see, it turns out the Final Fantasy VII Remake is not just a remake of Final Fantasy VII. It is simultaneously every modern AAA prestige video game at once. every role-playing game that has ever existed, a Disneyland of itself. The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the arcade game of video games, and a best-selling book series based on an HBO series. It also presents fascinating opportunities to ponder the foundations of the role-playing genre, an interesting venue for a dissection of modern action game design's chiefest pathological lies, and perhaps the deafeningly loudest multimedia punchline ever delivered unto the end of a decades-spanning joke. When I said earlier that the Final Fantasy VII Remake was the worst possible video game for me to review as the first game I review in this series reviewing games, I could not have been any less not joking. The exceptional gravity of this game has thus necessitated a review quite longer than you should expect in future episodes. Also, during the writing of this script, I saw fit to more delicately and elaborately establish the sort of critical vocabulary I will employ with a lighter touch in future episodes. So, in the spirit of its inspirations, this review of the Final Fantasy VII Remake spans 7 discs. Disc 1, Why Remake Final Fantasy VII? Disc 2, How Remake Final Fantasy VII? Disc 3, The Structure Atlas. Disc 4, Those Who Fight. Disc 5, The Trinket Ultimatum. Disc 6, A Most Delicious Vacuum. And Disc 7, The Forbidding New. Following these 7 discs, as always, is the bottom line. And now, please insert Disc 1. The Final Fantasy VII Remake is one of the most anticipated video games of all time. I reckon it's even more anticipated than the original Final Fantasy VII ever was. In fact, the first time I ever heard someone allude to a remake of Final Fantasy VII was also the first time I ever saw Final Fantasy VII. A kid in my art class was parading around a Final Fantasy VII Japanese demo disc. He'd paid full price for Tobal number 1 at the only shop in Indianapolis that sold Japanese video games. This kid clearly had a car. That day in class, he invited the girl I liked to a meeting of the Japan Club. He also invited me. I had never been to a meeting of the Japan Club. I went to exactly one meeting of my high school's Japan Club, during which the girl that I liked, often quite outspoken that she preferred PC games, vocalized the very first instance within my recollection of an allusion to a remake of Final Fantasy VII. It happened like this. The kid who'd brought the demo disc navigated swiftly to the end of the demo. Acquiescing to the request of a shouting crowd, he began the demo once more. The girl I liked and I stood with our backs to the wall. She was too cool for this game. I convincingly pretended to share her lack of enthusiasm. Aerith's big, wide, computer-graphicked face hovered up in a bath of green light. Aerith blinked, and the girl I liked said, and I quote, like, "Why can't the whole game just look like this?" Again, this girl had, many times and all the way back in 1996, claimed to prefer PC games to console games. She likely knew the rate at which video game graphical complexity evolved. She was, simply put, just hating. However, her haterism sparked in me a yearning I'd never quite shake. Until today. Almost 10 years later, as a tie-wearing employee of Sony Computer Entertainment Japan, I would attend, in an unofficial capacity, a launch day event for Final Fantasy XII on the ice-bright morning of Thursday, March 16th, 2006. Final Fantasy XII, only the third Final Fantasy in history to have 2 eyes in its Roman numeral, represented a new mastery of technology. Square Enix had further blurred the line between cutscene and in-game graphics. Here was the first Final Fantasy where you could rotate the camera with the right analog stick, possessing the most complex, deepest, and most dynamic and rewarding battle system yet in the series, fully voice-acted, its plot bursting with baroque political intrigue, emanating iron-fisted confidence in its own Byzantine lore, Final Fantasy XII arrived as perhaps the most thunderously sophisticated product yet to bear its brand's name. I had already played the full game at this point on a tiny 13-inch CRT television at my desk at Sony Computer Entertainment Japan, the burning fluorescent lights overhead extinguishing from the experience any spark of romanticism. Even so, I was able to declare it an excellent product and a worthy standard-bearer for its brand's name as we moved toward the next generation of video game console hardware. According to the docket I had looked over in my office at the launch day event, Square Enix then-president Yoichi Wada would give a brief speech before handing a copy of the game to the first customer in line. He would then pose for a photo with that most dedicated of consumers. The first man in line dressed completely in black. I could only see his eyes. A surgical mask covered his mouth. In those eyes, I perceived this man's blood-cold dedication, and I admired him. He didn't lower the mask until he stepped up to the cash register. His mouth was a perfect horizontal line. After Square Enix then-president Yoichi Wada thanked the young man and threw him the crowd for his continued dedication and consumerism, he offered the man in black a bite of the microphone. Do you want to know what he said? Please remake Final Fantasy VII for the PlayStation 3, thank you. I told the guys in my office about this at lunch. The younger men guffawed. My favorite old dude there did not crack a smile. This particular old dude had a big pompadour and a toothpick-chewing habit. He played guitar, a Yamaha SG, quote, like Carlos Santana, unquote, in a jazz fusion band on the weekends. He introduced me to Naniwa Express, and he called me Kiddo. Before he'd worked at Sony Computer Entertainment, he'd been a video game critic. Before that, he'd been a music critic. He listened to my story and said, "What a philosophical nightmare." One of the younger guys asked, "You mean for Square?" And the old dude said, "No, for all of us. For anyone who's ever touched a video game." The younger guy asked, "What do you mean?" And the old dude said, "They're going to remake Final Fantasy VII someday. And it's either going to end the world or save it." He was right. I knew it then, and I know it even louder now. In summary, that guy owned. 14 years later, it's 2020. We have the Final Fantasy VII Remake. It did not end the world, and it did not save the world either. On the other hand, the year is yet young. In the 23 years between Final Fantasy VII and today, Squaresoft has hyphenlessly merged with their rival Enix and produced 8 stylistically different numbered mainline Final Fantasy sequels. None of them has ever been exactly a remake of Final Fantasy VII, so none of them has ever fully satisfied the most dedicated of their Phantom line-setters. I could discuss this topic at extreme length, and maybe I will do so in an essay you can read on the internet someday soon. For brevity's sake, today let's leave it at this. The original Final Fantasy VII was a machine that begged us to beg its makers to make it again. The original Final Fantasy VII resulted from Squaresoft intimately acquainting themselves with multiple new technologies. Every element of its presentation sought to wow its witnesses with newness. As the result of a large team of artists experimenting with a vast range of new styles and techniques, Final Fantasy VII arrived as a sort of a half-baked mixed media project. Yet we who had never seen such dough did not split hairs over the completion of its baking. The original Final Fantasy VII wowed us from the moment we saw it starred a man with a sword bigger than his body and another man with a gun for an arm. It wowed us harder and harder with each new sizzling driplet of information that trickled onto the pages of our favorite glossy magazines. However, one crosses the fine line between anticipation and entitlement without ever quite meaning to. We cartridge babies had only just entered an acquaintanceship with CD-ROMs. Suddenly, you tell us a game can occupy 3 discs. Our heads explode, and the instant they reform, we wonder, why not 4? 2 years post Final Fantasy VII, we had Final Fantasy VIII, a game whose in-game character models achieved realistic human proportions. Suddenly, Final Fantasy VII acquired the grime of a baby's toy. The seams burst. Every game liker in my friendosphere called it out. My dad had said, one day back in 1997, after 2 minutes silently spectating Final Fantasy VII over my shoulder,
"He's got toasters for hands."
2 years later, I was saying the same thing. Lots of us were. The Final Fantasy VII Remake achieved monolith status as an idea the moment the PlayStation 2 happened. Squaresoft had announced Final Fantasies 9, 10, and 11 on the same day at the Square Millennium event on February 1st, 2000. I was, at this time, a friend of the internet. I saw many reactions to Final Fantasy X that day, and at least 22% of them contained an allusion to how cool Final Fantasy VII would be if it also had voice acting. So, what is it about Final Fantasy VII that begged us to beg its makers to make it again? In truth, the game contained multiple art styles. One might say that the original Final Fantasy VII began the mainstream conversation regarding the disparity between cutscene graphics and in-game graphics. The girl at that fateful Japan Club meeting had clobbered the nail on the head. The fatness of the line between cutscene and gameplay was far too great, even in a demo. Nobody in that room didn't see it. Most of us just didn't say anything. Furthermore, the battle scenes used realistically proportioned characters, while the traversal segments used lower polygon chibi character models. The actual game showcased more than one flavor of graphical disparity, even between cutscenes. Some cutscenes used the fanciest CG models, some used the lower polygon toaster-handed models. Heck, we could even consider the much-featured angular colored pencil character design illustrations by Tetsuya Nomura as yet another one of the game's many graphical styles, albeit an exterior one. As we watched technology march forward in later years, many of us looked back at Final Fantasy VII and yearned for possibilities unknown. The nature of Final Fantasy VII itself loomed behind all of this. The first game in the series had been famously made as a last-ditch effort requiring all of its developers' money. That's how it acquired its melodramatic, fatalistic name. Perhaps its developers had equated that financial and creative desperation with the game's ultimate success, because thereafter they evidently committed themselves to reinventing the series as completely as possible with each new numbered installment, always insisting on new characters, a new world, and even new game design mechanics. The design soul of Final Fantasy has always required its makers to eschew comfort in the making process. This has culminated in a series that behaves more like a fashion brand than a film franchise. Any smart enough critic of video games knows, for a fact, that Final Fantasy VI is, scientifically speaking, the best one. Any critic of video games with a soul will allow themselves to confess that yes, Final Fantasy IV is my favorite. Meanwhile, any intelligent critic of video games must acknowledge that Final Fantasy VII is the most important installment in the franchise, if not one of the 10 most important video games of all time. When Final Fantasy VII arrived, it brought big-budget cutscenes and prestige video games with it. The original Final Fantasy VII left multiple suitcases in our living rooms, and we are still unpacking them 2 decades later. With the thunder of its arrival, Final Fantasy VII installed deep-digging nostalgia hooks in its fans' brains. As much as it represented the apex of its makers' story crafting and character-building techniques, Final Fantasy VII represented the beginning of their flirtation with technical artistry and stylistic risk-taking. I mean, they made a movie with Alec Baldwin in it. So yeah, you could say that for some dude to tell the president of the game's publisher that he would prefer any remake of Final Fantasy VII at all to the complex, beautiful, sophisticated, incredible game that he had just waited in line 12 hours to pay $100 for, yet had not even played. Yeah, you could say that that represented a genuine philosophical nightmare for any creative enterprise. Between 2006 and 2015, rumors of a Final Fantasy VII Remake bubbled and taunted players. The specter of this particular non-existent game shadowed our perception of every new Final Fantasy game to emerge. I confess that I too succumbed to the joy of speculation, and thus failed to appreciate Final Fantasy XIII as much upon its release as I do now. In horse blinder-wearing comparison to Final Fantasy VII, every subsequent Final Fantasy does in fact lack at least a little bit of soul. By the time the jargon-filled, fuselage-shaped Final Fantasy XIII released, I yearned, loudly and in public, for a Final Fantasy that remembered the exact character of Final Fantasies VI and VII. I didn't exactly want a remake of VII. I just wanted a game with relatable characters, maybe 3 of whom formed a love triangle, involved in an elevator pitchable situation. You would literally need the elevator in the Burj Dubai to break down twice in order to pitch the situation the characters find themselves in Final Fantasy XIII. And I say that affectionately. Square Enix appealed to its most vocal fans by releasing an animated Final Fantasy VII film, a weird third-person shooter spin-off starring an optional Final Fantasy VII character, and a just slightly too luxurious prequel game starring a character only featured in the most hidden of the original game's optional cutscenes. Yet because it was video games, it wasn't enough. The idea of a Final Fantasy VII Remake overshadowed any attempt at a new numbered Final Fantasy. Heck, the idea of a Final Fantasy VII Remake continues even to this day to overshadow the actual Final Fantasy VII Remake itself, to the point that I physically cannot stop myself from referring to it as the Final Fantasy VII Remake. Also, Final Fantasy VII Remake doesn't even cover the entirety of the original game. So until this episodic Final Fantasy VII Remake project is completely done, the specter of philosophical nightmare will continue to loom. So, after enough years of risk-taking, a grim meeting took place in a cold, windowless room in Square Enix Tower. Tetsuya Nomura lifted a silver lid, revealing a big red button. Those assembled gave in to the philosophical nightmare. The time had come to remake Final Fantasy VII. That Square Enix chose to announce that this remake was in development before the release of Final Fantasy XV communicated volumes to the most dedicated of conspiracy theorists. Therefore, I have presented my case that the Final Fantasy VII Remake is one of the most important video games ever released, if only by spiritual accident. On a deeper level, however, it terrifies me to report that it is also a pretty fascinating video game to talk about in a vacuum. Over the past 3 years alone, I have replayed the original Final Fantasy VII 16 times from beginning to end. I did this for the purpose of making a video series comparing the game's 1997 localization against its original Japanese script. I have reckoned with the structure and narrative of Final Fantasy VII in a loudly loquacious manner elsewhere than here, and have largely reconfirmed to myself that the original game possesses a remarkable narrative pace and a generous variety of story themes. The characters are likable, the plot invests cleverly and earns its twists. The game design systems are elegant and classic. So now that I've disclosed my personal biases, let's talk about yours, or your lack of them. If you come to the Final Fantasy VII Remake without any biases, I salute you. Hopefully, in this section, I have illustrated that the game is indecipherable for me personally, without unpacking much baggage. For you, however, the hypothetical viewer who has never heard of Final Fantasy VII, you might find exciting moments, textured interestingly, and a likable cast of characters. We've got Cloud Strife, a cold-hearted jerk with a big sword, a particular set of skills, and a mysterious need for money. We've got Barrett Wallace, a tree-hugging, corporation-hating noble terrorist with a gun for an arm, who hires Cloud for a job. We've got Tifa Lockhart, Cloud's estranged childhood friend who introduced him to the eco-terrorists' avalanche as a potential job opportunity, despite her own discomfort with the violent escalation of their activities. We've got Aerith Gainsborough, a hilarious weird girl Cloud meets perfectly by accident just when he was starting to rekindle his relationship with Tifa. It turns out Aerith might be the most important person in the world by a wide margin, though that's getting ahead of the scope of the segment of the original Final Fantasy VII that the Final Fantasy VII Remake covers.
Let's keep on trucking.
Final Fantasy VII starts out with our characters in the middle of a job. It goes well. We hang out in their world for a day. They embark on another job. This time, something interesting happens. This is good storytelling 101. Along the way, we hang out with these relatable characters and watch their complexities emerge through situations. A love triangle blossoms. We learn about everybody. They learn about each other. The characters develop. It's deceptively simple. The original managed to pull this off with toaster-handed Lego dolls. The remake pulls harder thanks to formal advancements such as bigger graphics and voice acting. Even on the molecular level, the makers of the Final Fantasy VII Remake have tenderly placed story first. For example, early in the game, at the end of one routine battle or another, Cloud might reject Barrett's thinly veiled fishing for a compliment.
Hey, did you see me in action?
Must have missed it.
Now that was something else.
That was nothing.
In the final chapters of the game, as a battle concludes, Cloud might initiate a compliment, and now it's Barrett's turn to play cool.
Good job.
Whatever, man. Let's go.
Keep it up, man.
Yeah, you too.
Cloud and Barrett's burgeoning mutual respect, which eventually blossoms into a genuine friendship, is one of the more overlooked aspects of Final Fantasy VII's story, though it is no less integral to the game's lasting appeal than the results of the infinitely more fan-fictioned love triangle. To see evidence that the Final Fantasy VII Remake understands so essential and delicate a plot nuance, and to see it express this understanding even in so micro-level an interaction, fills me with appreciation, and allows me to conclude that,
Wow.
after all these years, they remade Final Fantasy VII, and they did not mess it up. So it is that after 2 decades and 3 years of attempts of varying levels of evident earnestness to achieve the sales impact of Final Fantasy VII, some fly on the wall or other blabbed the juice in the right place at the right time. With the Final Fantasy VII Remake, Square Enix has communicated to me personally that they now fully understand exactly why Final Fantasy VII was so much more blockbustingly powerful than Final Fantasy VIII, Final Fantasy IX, and so on. Having said that, I would still recommend you play the original first. What exactly do I mean by that? Maybe we'll find out in the next section. Actually, we probably won't. I do not envy the artists and game designers who faced the challenge of confronting the unique philosophical nightmare remaking Final Fantasy XVII represented. Makers of any game of any type daily face the high probability of enraging at least one member of their audience with some offhand stylistic choice or another. It's hard enough making a video game that most of the audience hasn't been playing in their heads for 20 years. To remake a video game so beloved, and so simultaneously entangled with the very concept of a remake, is to grapple with destiny itself. On the one hand, chances are a remake of a game as big as Final Fantasy VII is going to go pretty well. Raise your hand if you thought Square Enix was going to totally mess up the Final Fantasy VII Remake. I can't see you, though I'm pretty sure if I could, I wouldn't be seeing a lot of hands. Square Enix might be clueless enough to butcher the pixel art of every beloved ancient 16-bit Final Fantasy game, and Chrono Trigger, and act genuinely shocked when people notice. Though I reckon no one even tangentially involved with the development of the Kingdom Hearts series would dare leave a single fan unserved when it came time to make a AAA product. I found the making of Final Fantasy VII Remake series on the official Final Fantasy YouTube channel useful in mind-palacing the creators' beautifully pure intentions with the Final Fantasy VII Remake. I think this quote from music supervisor Keiji Kawamori cuts to the heart of it. While there are many people who played and liked the original, there will probably also be many new players who first encounter Final Fantasy VII with the remake. And I want those people who hear the music for the first time to think, wow, Final Fantasy VII has some great tunes. It would also be great if that could then inspire them to go back to the original Final Fantasy VII and appreciate the music from them both. You might say that I'm not exactly a Final Fantasy VII newcomer. While I did play Final Fantasy VII from start to finish literally 16 times between 2017 and 2019, I'll admit I did so for purely scientific purposes. I love the game, though I'm not exactly the biggest fan of it. My favorite Final Fantasy battle theme is hands down Fight 2 from Final Fantasy IV, followed by Blinded by Light from Final Fantasy XIII, followed by Battle on the Big Bridge from Final Fantasy V, followed by Those Who Fight Further from Final Fantasy VII. Those Who Fight, the vanilla battle theme from Final Fantasy VII, might not even make my top 10. However, one of its several arrangements in the Final Fantasy VII Remake arrives with such loud, terrific thunder that it made me yell yes, so loudly that my dog came sprinting out of the bedroom to rescue me. It wasn't even the first time that remix had come up in the game. The timing of it just blew my mind. So, all my biases aside, I'd say yeah, Keiji Kawamori is probably right. I'll be the first to admit that I have trouble working with people. I have trouble listening to other people. It's cast a shadow over my career. I have trouble taking suggestions from people. I have trouble thinking other people's ideas are as good as mine. When someone presents me an idea that immediately strikes me as good as or better than mine, I tend to apply science and statistics until I've sufficiently proven to myself and everyone else that actually it isn't. Usually, my proof is pretty sound, though the soundness of my proof seldom stops me from feeling like a little bit of a monster every time I feel the need to do this. Being bad at working with others has made me more powerful at being alone, though who really wants to be good at being alone? What I'm getting at here is that I projected my own personal preferences onto the Final Fantasy VII Remake composer Masashi Hamauzu, whose work I have admired for many years. The man composed the definitively second best Final Fantasy battle theme of all time. When I thought of him being asked to compose music for the Final Fantasy VII Remake, I felt sorry for him. Remixing someone else's work can have beautiful results, though for a composer as accomplished as Hamauzu, it struck me as a tiny insult. However, it turns out Hamauzu was, in fact, remixing the composer of the #1 best Final Fantasy battle theme of all time, Nobuo Uematsu. And he remixed that man his way, loudly, wickedly, virtuosically, and again. And again, tracks in the Final Fantasy VII Remake slam almost unbearably hard. One of the worst things, if not the worst thing you can say to a person after their band finishes performing a show is,
"It looks like you guys had fun up there."
However, when I say this, as someone all of whose friends told me that I had fun up there, at every show I ever played, you know it comes from the right place. I can tell that Masashi Hamauzu did have fun up there. He and his comrades didn't just compose remixes of Nobuo Uematsu. They loved Nobuo Uematsu's music in public. They wined and dined that music down to every scrupulous detail imaginable. Witness the very beginning of the game, where the sound team weaves motifs of fan-beloved Final Fantasy VII final boss theme, One Winged Angel, into the opening overture, just as our girlfriend, Aerith, and the camera slide past the visually memorable Loveless Opera House on Midgar Main Street. Here, the composers have staked an ethereal claim that One Winged Angel is, and actually was all along, a song from the opera playing at the theater the very night our story begins. As a first-time audience member, our response might be, okay. As a returning Final Fantasy VII customer, our response is, I'll buy it. The game rolls on with lush, high-concept pop song-like remixes of iconic tracks from the span of the old Final Fantasy VII narrative, wafting out of jukeboxes, radios, and gramophones. We buy them on music discs at item shops and marvel at their album art, delicately referencing music from a wide range of historical influences. This particular track felt like city pop in the original game. In the remake, it's been remixed that way, complete with an album art reminiscent of Eijin Suzuki's work for Tatsuro Yamashita. All this thought for a song we only hear as diegesis, beneath environmental white noise. Nickel by dime, these tiny touches add up until we're either genuinely impressed or we're a born hater. I feel like the Final Fantasy VII Remake as a whole comes from this same kind of a place of sweet sincerity. This game exists purely as a gesture of niceness. The Final Fantasy VII Remake is a sweater your grandma spent tens of millions of dollars knitting for you, and stands to profit tens of millions of dollars by giving it to you. The thoroughness and care the developers paid to the details shocked me numerous times throughout my first playthrough. They really must have wanted to impress fans of the old game and new fans. They seized every conceivable opportunity to one-up every stylistic hallmark of the original in a way that sought to also impress any new player. Let me tell you about one example that stuck out to me repeatedly as I logged my dozens of hours of footage of the game. The original Final Fantasy VII exuded extreme confidence in its transitions from cutscene to gameplay. It placed several of them up front. Famously, the CG train pulls into the station as the camera moves. Low-polygon station guards scale in unison with the movement of the camera. The camera stops, and then the train stops, becoming part of a pre-rendered background upon a single frame, before our low-polygon friends emerge. Minutes later comes the famous instance of the camera tilting up to show Mako Reactor number 1 while the player is still miraculously controlling protagonist Cloud Strife. Sure, many players back in 1997, such as the girl I liked in my art class, rightly preferred PC games and had seen pre-rendered cutscenes before. However, Final Fantasy VII beat us over the head with this tiny little transition trick, and those beatings added up to an ultimate impression of technological confidence. The Final Fantasy VII Remake continues to bear this torch. It does absolutely not stop slamming our skulls with this technique. Transitions out of gameplay and into cutscene happen with silky seamlessness that might not impress us immediately if we've played, for example, Red Dead Redemption 2. However, as cutscenes unfold over many cuts between multiple cinematically composed camera angles, the Final Fantasy VII Remake readies its secret weapon. You never know when it's coming. The final shot of every cutscene of the Final Fantasy VII Remake goes to whatever contortionist lengths necessary to release its hold on a speaking character, naturally find Cloud Strife, and put the camera dramatically behind him. The intensity applies doubly or quadruply to up-pumping pre-battle cutscenes, where the camera might zoom back from a boss monster's face and slide to a stop behind Cloud just as his hands twist-grip his sword hilt. Once I noticed the prolificity of these transitions, I couldn't stop. Somebody really loved the idea of these transitions with an obsession tantamount to hysteria. Eventually, I developed a monumental respect for this element of craft. Some of these transitions are 12 seconds long. It's such a small thing in this world where we have one-take style video games like God of War 2018. Though you know what? I find this impressive because of God of War's dedication to the one-take style, not despite it. I see this obsessive, insistive implementation of a stylistic hallmark that, let's face it, the majority of players will probably never, ever vocalize, and I can't consider it anything other than a direct micro-homage to the very soul of Final Fantasy VII itself. That's a roundabout sort of thesis statement, though hey, it's the one we got. In summary, the Final Fantasy VII Remake's makers want to remind you of Final Fantasy VII even when you're not looking. However, of course you are going to be looking at it most of the time. That's why they call them video games. The Final Fantasy VII Remake certainly is a game we experience by playing it and engaging with its design systems, though for probably a large portion of its players, it represents an experience of visual and dramatic bonanzism more so than it appeals as a game that you play. The visuals of the Final Fantasy VII Remake have been deadly serious business since long before the game was officially announced. Visual art direction of the Final Fantasy VII Remake represents a Herculean accomplishment. The artists had to reimagine not just beloved characters and world locations, they had to reimagine beloved characters and world locations that players have been imagining as looking better since the first time they saw them. As we've already explored, perhaps too extensively, the original Final Fantasy VII presented players with a salad bar of visual styles, not a one of them as pretty as the hamburger in our heads. Over the years since Final Fantasy VII's original release, many Final Fantasy games have shown us many visual styles. Most Final Fantasy games after 7 have exhibited uniformity and artistic confidence between their varying scenes. Final Fantasy VII lay dead in the back room of our imaginations for years, a pile of half-delivered promises and compromises. It's almost not a joke to insinuate that Final Fantasy VII is probably one of the main reasons people started using artificial intelligence to upscale photos. Fans of the game have clamored for years for, at the very least, a version with more expressive character models or higher resolution backgrounds. In the days following the release of the Final Fantasy VII Remake, I witnessed several intelligent individuals on Twitter convincingly express that while the remake is fine and all they really want is the Remako mod, which presents the original game with HD backgrounds and full motion videos, paired with the Be a Cause script, which presents an infinitely more professional English translation. I only had to scroll down for about 6 seconds into the comments on the Remako mod's trailer before I found a comment that said, "This looks better than the remake." First of all, buddy, the difference between a remake and a remaster is huge. Second, the Remako mod is great. Third, as the remake has proven, much to my vindication and the crushing disappointment of the haters in the comments of my own Final Fantasy VII YouTube videos, it's pronounced Mako, not Mako.
So how do we get to the bridge above Mako's storage? It's here sucking up Mako! I can practically taste the Mako in here.
Also, they pronounced Tsang's name Tsung, which is how I've been pronouncing it for years, and correct if you know any Chinese.
You led us on a merry chase, Aerith.
Sung.
Also, while we're here, it's pronounced Shunmu, not Shenmue. The Final Fantasy VII Remake is not a Final Fantasy VII Remaster. In its game design, its structure, and especially in its visuals, it represents a ground-up reimagination of Final Fantasy VII's very soul. Single-screen, fuzzy pre-rendered backgrounds have become Unreal Tournament map-sized nightmare junkyards teeming with downtrodden human life, peppered with side quest givers. A throwaway comic relief non-player character whose entire story motivation consisted of the single text box, "I'm leaving town," has become a fully voiced recurring character who's leaving town because Cloud told him to after rescuing him from Shinra guards who suspect he knows something about Avalanche. Not all of the non-player characters look so fancy. Johnny looks like his dad owns a Lamborghini dealership, though a lot of the NPCs look like they fell out of a Dodge Ram van from Craigslist. Weimer looks like a PlayStation 3 character. Lots of the NPCs look like PlayStation 3 characters. Some of these NPCs look like they fell out of Final Fantasy XI and are trying to treat it like spring break. Some of the NPCs look like they'd call the ESRB if a Dreamcast character moved into their neighborhood.
Oh no! I'm late! I gotta go!
Chocobo Sam could have been in a PS2 game. Look at these repetitive canned hand gestures. You know, I saw someone on Twitter who proposed that Chocobo Sam was supposed to look like a PlayStation 2 character, as a sort of throwback to the mixed media graphical style of the original Final Fantasy VII. This person theorized, and I think they were being sincere, though how can you actually tell on Twitter? This person theorized that Chocobo Sam has so many lines of dialogue and is involved in so many scenes alongside 2 other high-quality AAA character models with whom he forms a trio that there's just no way he was low-tech looking on accident. To this, I say that as an adult, I have met way too many developers of video games that I loved in my youth time, And I have come to believe that any credit at all is generally way too much credit when you're talking about this kind of a thing in a video game. The fact is probably just that the game was in development a very long time, and that some characters just aren't that important. I love how these water effects pay homage to the work of Ray Harryhausen. The main characters look incredible. Barrett is clearly a PS4 character. Cloud is a low-key PS5 character. The art direction sensibility of the new main character models astounded me. The main cast all look like they belong together. The overall style wisely surpasses the cinematic wispiness of the Final Fantasy VII Advent Children film and grounds itself in a firm visual language, effortlessly affecting credibility both in cutscenes and in battle action mannerisms. Visually, these are fully modern prestige video game characters, each designed to the rigorous standard we usually see applied only to one or two principal main characters in a modern game. They feel like people. This is ridiculously crucial. These characters need to feel like people. The fans may not always put it into these exact words, though they only like Final Fantasy VII because they like these characters as people. The Final Fantasy VII Remake's amalgamation of expensive and confident visual expression techniques all pull together toward effecting a plausible impression of these people as people. Alongside non-player characters dressed like they work at the bank in the afternoon and J. Crew at night, these Final Fantasy protagonists run the risk of ridiculosity. However, the plot and pacing sell us so well on their personality quirks that it makes sense that Cloud is carrying his Buster Sword down the frolicking nightlife streets of Wall Market. We have known Cloud for 16 hours at the point we first enter Wall Market. We know a guy like him in the real world, who also wears good, sturdy, expensive heirloom quality cap-toed work boots. We know he's the type of guy who would wear his backpack to the club. He can't high-five because of some aphanphasmophobia or another. He tells everybody to get back and offers to quote-unquote handle everything. He takes credit for every victory, even when we're controlling another character.
Was never in doubt.
Even when he's dead. Crikey. He even jumps in the middle of a cutscene to take credit for one of the 2 boss fights in the whole game in which he does not participate. Buddy, that's exactly half of them. Wow, he reminds me of everyone I have ever worked with in an office. Barrett, meanwhile, has a literal gun for an arm. He's a dad. We know he's got a temper, though he's an overall safety-loving individual. Thank God his politics don't make me uncomfortable.
A good man who serves a great evil is not without sin. He must recognize and accept his complicity. He must open his eyes to the truth that his corporate masters are profiting from the planet's pain. Only then can he redeem himself.
Tifa, meanwhile, looks exactly like what she is, the winner of a Square Enix-sponsored Final Fantasy VII cosplay contest. She's got abs. I'd let her kill me. She's the only one of the 3 characters who get an opportunity to sit on a bench who does not manspread. Go ahead and sprawl out, buddy. Your lower back deserves it. Can we stop talking about how big her breasts are and start talking about how small her materia slots are? Do the materia shrink to fit the closest hole? Is this the Final Fantasy VII Remake or the Legend of Zelda TV show?
Excuse me, Aerith.
Aerith also looks exactly like our hearts have always imagined her. She is visually, as she is spiritually, Cloud's real girlfriend. I could prove this with science. Just look at the way they look at each other. Look at the way she walks. I'd let her kill me. She's a girl. She's a girly girl. And she's powerful. The original Final Fantasy VII in 1997 presented an Aerith translated with ample use of a tuning fork calibrated for Disney princesses. Early in the Final Fantasy VII Remake, Aerith casually, in an oops moment of desperation, utters an upper PG bad word.
I'm not some princess who needs to be coddled. Shit.
I'll admit, I laughed out loud. The original Final Fantasy VII came out shortly after I had just turned 18 years old. I'd seen a lot of rated R movies at that point. Every video game was still more or less rated G back then. Even as a habitual avoider of swear words, my 18-year-old self felt catered to by Final Fantasy VII's Barrett's use of a couple four-letter words. Here was a video game character who was appropriately mad at something. If my theory is correct, and the Final Fantasy VII Remake's makers indeed wanted to one-up the original in every way, even the smallest ways, then surprising me personally with the timing of several profanity usages must be the result of a Nobel Prize-worthy mathematical calculation. The teacher of the only creative writing class I took in college told us that if you use profanity only with extreme restraint, you can achieve a maximal reaction even in a complete prude. Just because later in this review I'm going to literally call a boss heck house numerous times does not mean I'm a prude, okay? I listen to K-pop almost every day, and I've seen porn before. The truth is, I consider profanity just another type of cliché. In my own writing, I make every effort to avoid clichés like the flu. Having said that, several moments of profanity in the Final Fantasy VII Remake's English script made me yell in triumph. One of Cloud's limit breaks, which you will typically keep in your pocket and execute only at times of extreme calculated opportunity, following a full Command and Conquer match's worth of manufacturing your proverbial tanks and pointing them at the enemy base, opens with Cloud inviting the opponent to a tango.
Let's dance, asshole!
Furthermore, Cloud telling a ghost
I don't have time for your shit.
made me scream every time I played through the game. That's 4 screams. Perhaps most exuberantly, I shouted at Cloud's incitement of the penultimate boss to
Bring it on, bitch.
Many of you have DM'd me on Twitter, patreon.com/actionbutton, or discord.gg/actionbutton to ask me if I have any plans to make a video series comparing the English translation of the Final Fantasy VII Remake against its original Japanese script. First of all, my video series Let's Mosey, a slow translation of Final Fantasy VII, was actually not a video series about comparing the 1997 English translation of Final Fantasy VII against its original Japanese script. It was, I think very clearly, a video series about revisiting a place you inhabited long ago, and now seeing it with a completely transformed worldview. In that video series, fluency in the Japanese language stood in for a new half a life's worth of experiences around the entire world, many of them profound, some of them crushingly sad, most of them transcending and trivializing mere memories of a childish video game. If you thought it was about making fun of a rushed English translation done by a non-professional translator who had only 2 weeks to complete a massive task, I honestly, sincerely do not know what to tell you. Now that that's out of the way, no, I don't have any plans to make a video series comparing the Final Fantasy VII Remake's English voiceover to the original Japanese. That would be the most boring video in the world for me to make, though if I did make it, it would be a lot shorter than this video. Actually, okay, let's make that video. In Japanese, Barrett says, "That sure was hard," and Red 13 replies, "No time to rest. We must hurry." In English, Barrett says,
Damn, does it feel good to be alive?
and Red 13 says,
Quite. But we could still die later tonight.
"Sorry, I like the English better." The end. The Final Fantasy VII Remake goes so far above and beyond fans' expectations to remake Final Fantasy VII that it even expands and explodes the nonsense of the original game. Perhaps the marquee example is the Heck House boss fight. A questionably ridiculous random enemy in the original game has become a shockingly long arena battle, complete with genuine story relevance and appropriate esports level commentary. The Final Fantasy VII Remake at large follows through on this mission of dedication to even the weirdness and idiocy of its source material. Out of strangeness and antiquated game flow elements, the Final Fantasy VII Remake creates a roller coaster of high-octane drama. Of course, it's a little hard to take some of the headier stuff seriously when Cloud insists on toppling every chair in Shinra Tower. Man, you'd think with all their money, Shinra would have figured out that you can put stuff inside of cardboard boxes. And to be honest, sometimes I remember I'm playing a video game, and I hate remembering I'm playing a video game. For example, where does Aerith's staff go after a battle? I wouldn't mind this so much if Cloud and Barret didn't so prominently display their weapons at all times. And where did Aerith's staff come from during this cutscene? What else do I have in here? Oh man, I have a bunch of sentences I didn't finish writing. I just have a bunch of weird little idea stubs. Why do the people in the slums keep calling the slums the slums? Like when Barret and Jesse and Biggs and Wedge finish the reactor bombing mission, they keep being like, we gotta get back to the
Slums.
When I'm going home from somewhere, I don't say, I've gotta get back to my apartment in my apartment building. I say, I gotta go home. During my research stage, I marked every loading time in the Final Fantasy VII Remake. The game loads exactly once per chapter, at the end of one chapter and before the beginning of the next, though it also loads an additional time midway through chapter 13 and during one of the side quests of chapter 14. In addition, it loads at every game over after you choose retry. I obtained frame-perfect times for all of these loading times. I fully believe that the Final Fantasy VII Remake will run at 60 FPS on the PlayStation 5 later this year, and also that its loading times will be remarkably shorter. Though, here's where we are right now. On a PlayStation 4 Pro equipped with a 2TB Seagate FireCuda hybrid hard drive, the average loading time was 28 seconds and 5 frames. That's a long time to wait for revenge every time Rufus kills you. In conclusion, the Final Fantasy VII Remake is nice and all, though all I really wanted was a widescreen demake of Final Fantasy VII using the exact pixel art and chiptune quality of Final Fantasy VI. I have wanted this for years. At any rate, these graphics are great, and yes, I do love them. Yes, the music does make me feel like it is my birthday, and Masashi Hamauzu is my dad. However, none of that really matters. It's not so much that we loved Final Fantasy VII in 1997 in spite of its graphics being weird. It's not even so much that we respected the grandiosity and the breadth of the gesture. It's mostly that we would have hated it had the story not been so perfectly structured. We love Final Fantasy VII. We love Final Fantasy VII because Cloud holds a big sword with Chinese letters etched into the blade, while sitting astride a motorcycle in front of a red sky on a wall scroll hanging in several college dorms of our memory. We love Final Fantasy VII because Sephiroth is a sick freak. We love Final Fantasy VII because we had never seen that much CG in a video game in 1997. We love Final Fantasy VII because Barret has a gun for an arm and calls a city a pizza. We love Final Fantasy VII because you can slot materia into your weapons, level them up, and then trade them with your party members like Pokemon. We love Final Fantasy VII because the logo is just plain good graphic design, and the gradient on that meteor was ahead of its time by at least a decade. We love Final Fantasy VII because One Winged Angel is a blasting hot tune, and though you might feel weird listening to it in your car, when you get all the way to the end of that game and it plays during the climactic battle, you will make it wake the neighbors. However, we would not care about Final Fantasy VII at all were it not for its perfect pacing. All that other stuff is great, though I promise you, you would be finding out about the Gold Saucer's roller coaster minigame from the sole viral tweet of a kid with a SoundCloud and 120 Twitter followers, were it not for the game's perfect pacing. The Final Fantasy VII Remake proves my hypothesis beyond a shadow of my doubt. The Final Fantasy VII Remake proves that even Final Fantasy XV could have been a timeless classic if they had just written the story outline 20 years before they started making the game. Perhaps the Final Fantasy VII Remake's makers feared their fans. Their fans are numerous, and they do come from all walks of life. Final Fantasy VII fans carry with them a wide variety of tastes and preferences. Any seemingly superficial element of Final Fantasy VII could be an existing fan's favorite thing about Final Fantasy VII. At some point in the creative life, a creator may make the decision to equate their fear of their fans with a respect for them. Thus, the Final Fantasy VII Remake's boundless devotion to recreating every textural syllable of the original game. Any event you might have imagined took place 23 years ago in that fictional city of Midgar, the developers took craftspersonly pains to implement into this 3D remake, because they want to make sure you, the person who liked it even as it once was, have a good time. The result is a full, long, modern video game based on one chapter of the original Final Fantasy VII. Many fans initially retched with written shrillness when Square Enix followed the loud announcement of the game's development with a quieter announcement that it was the first quote-unquote episode in a quote-unquote series, and that it would only deal with the Midgar segment of the original game. In the 5 years since this announcement, I have seen persons ranging from Twitter users to professional video game critics toss off ballpark percentages and timestamps for the length of the original 1997 Final Fantasy VII's Midgar chapter. I've seen it most commonly described as 1/5 of the game, or 4 to 5 hours of the game, though in the weeks surrounding the game's release, I perceived a deflation of that number. I saw professional critics describe that opening Midgar chapter as 3 to 4 hours in their reviews of the Final Fantasy VII Remake. My friend Jason Schreier described it as 1/10 of the original game. One critic described Midgar as 2 hours. I remember differently. That's my way of saying I remember correctly. First of all, I replayed all of the original Final Fantasy VII literally 16 times between 2017 and 2019. I did so while consulting a multilingual spreadsheet containing all of the text from every version of the game. I can tell you with confidence that literally 30% of Final Fantasy VII's mandatory story text happens in Midgar. After Midgar, the game opens up. Much of the text after Midgar happens during optional side missions or within conversations with NPCs you might not even talk to. When I tweeted that I was going to replay Midgar at a leisurely pace on twitch.tv/actionbutton, while Mind Palace channeling my 1997 self, immediately my replies filled with people telling me that they had beaten Midgar in less than an hour. Looking at many of their profiles revealed that they had all retweeted the same GIF of a funny physics fail from the Final Fantasy VII Remake. Let's be honest, all those people were probably sentient Halloween costumes. A few more reasonable people expressed that they'd recently played Final Fantasy VII for the first time and that they finished Midgar in under 3 hours. Many of them, when provoked, reported that yes, it was on the PlayStation 4, and yes, they had in fact engaged the no random battles cheat a couple times and engaged the 3x speed cheat a couple of times as well. I take a couple of times to mean most of the time. When I channeled my best impression of my exact game design knowledge circa 1997, my playthrough of the original Final Fantasy VII's Midgar chapter took me 8 hours, 5 minutes, and 17 seconds. To be honest, I recall that my first playthrough of Midgar in 1997 took me 8 hours and 58 minutes. My similarly Twitch-streamed, leisurely, casual, idiots commentary bonanza-fied 100% playthrough of the Final Fantasy VII Remake took me 45 hours, 50 minutes, and 54 seconds. Let's go ahead and round that up to 45 hours and 51 minutes. That's 2,751 minutes of the remake versus 484 minutes of the original. Original Midgar is thus only 17.59% the length of remake Midgar. If you'd prefer that as a multiple, Midgar 2020 is 5.68 times the length of Midgar 1997. In this way, we can say that the Final Fantasy VII Remake represents a 568% inflation rate applied to the original Final Fantasy VII. I find this a far more interesting conversation than the conversation about what percentage of the original Final Fantasy VII is Midgar. I don't know, maybe that's just me. How did the remakers achieve this? Well, simply put, they padded out the original game's story with filler. Though I would argue, after playing it all the way through 4 times, that it's gourmet filler. Rather than saying they padded it out with filler, we should say they fleshed it out with beef. Remarkably, the stretched-out Final Fantasy VII Remake somehow retains the pacing texture of an entire PlayStation 1 role-playing game. Look at it this way. If the original Final Fantasy VII is all 8 seasons of the HBO series Game of Thrones, the Final Fantasy VII Remake is every book of the A Song of Ice and Fire series published up until this point. That's like a reverse adaptation. I gotta say, first of all, it should have been 9 seasons. And secondly, this makes the Final Fantasy VII Remake quite unique among other mainstream entertainment products. I consider this one of the most exciting topics to discuss about this game, so I spent 7 days breaking down the pacing of the Final Fantasy VII Remake in order to compose what I call a structure atlas. My hypothesis, simply put, was that the Final Fantasy VII Remake was paced really weird because its makers knew they could get away with it. This gives us the sub-hypothesis that the developers did not know for a period of several years whether or not they could get away with this sort of pacing in any other game. Let's assume Final Fantasy VIII, 9, 10, 11, and 12 were all exactly the sorts of games Square wanted them to be. Every bold stylistic choice, every game design shift, every flirtation with emerging game genres. Let's assume that Final Fantasy XIII was the first stealth attempt at a Final Fantasy VII remake. Let's assume there was some dark, sinister, philosophical nightmare of a meeting during which Final Fantasy's rights holders concluded that something must be done to recapture the love the public showed and continues to show Final Fantasy VII. Final Fantasy XIII shares many superficial similarities to Final Fantasy VII. It does not, however, share the manga-like narrative style, the confident anime series-like pacing, or most of the game design systems. Long ago, I theorized that Japanese RPG directors really just wanted to make Gears of War-like adventure-flavored action shooting games. Shortly after I publicly theorized that, the developers of 2009's hot-doggishly linear Final Fantasy XIII explained in an interview that, among other games, they'd studied Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare for pacing reference. This shouldn't have shocked anybody. RPGs have never been just about numbers going up. The upgoing numbers always served to hold places for future graphical or mechanical richness. As evidence, look at Final Fantasy IV, 5, 6, and 7. All of these games start with a boss that has a don't attack phase. You face a strict damage blast if you attack the boss during that phase. These bosses appear right up front in these games, as though to condition the player to expect tactical depth tied to graphical expression. In older Final Fantasy games and older RPGs, enemies, even bosses, didn't animate at all. Now, suddenly, for the Mist Dragon in Final Fantasy IV, you have to use the graphics of the boss as a clue for guidance of your tactical plan. Also, this seamlessly introduces the philosophical core of the active time battle system, which is that time flows even when you're not making decisions. You can just wait for the boss to come back. So we can see that even as far back as 1991, Japanese role-playing games have been borrowing micro-narrative techniques from action games. Old role-playing games contained towns and overworlds and townspeople to talk to and equipment to buy, simply to puff up and stretch out a world that, let's face it, was not real. All baroque, labyrinthine, ornamental game design systems and meandering fetch quests in old RPGs served to palpabilize the story's world. What these games lacked in graphics, they made up for in length and immersion-enriching systems. Fans of RPGs long ago were not fans of RPGs. They were people who insisted on the good games. We didn't want to just play games. We wanted to hang out in them. Any way you slice it, Final Fantasy XIII represented a disconnect between maker and audience. I mean, at least some of the audience. Final Fantasy XIII made me and my pet Nostalgia uneasy back in 2009 because it lacked towns and NPCs and all that hangoutitude I'd come to love from the Final Fantasy series. However, my respect for it has glacially skyrocketed over the last decade. Final Fantasy XIII is a shockingly texturally interesting video game in its own right, though for reasons purely different from older Final Fantasy games. In short, with Final Fantasy XIII, Square Enix replaced many of the elements that older Japanese RPGs had used as placeholders. Out with the towns and in with the fully voiced Hollywood quality graphics. The numbers sure were a lot bigger, though. Final Fantasy XIV is an MMORPG, and it's good. Final Fantasy XV saw Square Enix directly combating the criticisms against Final Fantasy XIII. Unlike XIII, XV had a wide-open world. You could drive a car, unlike XIII, in which each character seemed influenced by a slightly different Swedish filmmaker. The characters in XV had easily graspable Ninja Turtleian personalities. You had a leader, a cool yet rude guy, a guy who did machines, and a party dude. Final Fantasy XV eschewed the intense hallway struts of XIII in favor of a buffet bucket of side quests and quest givers loafing around many largish towns. At the time Final Fantasy XV came out, Square Enix had already promised us the Final Fantasy VII Remake. For some people who I know personally, Final Fantasy XV seemed like a demo for the promised Final Fantasy VII Remake. So, the Final Fantasy VII Remake represents its developers once again reckoning with old and new. They will likely dance this tango until they evaporate, and I will cry when they inevitably do. However, for now, I have sniffed, sipped, savored, and spat the Final Fantasy VII Remake's amalgamation of old, new, linear, grandiose, action, adventure, role-playing, and AAA prestige. I come to you today possessive of the conclusion that the Final Fantasy VII Remake possesses a remarkably unique texture, yet exactly unseen in modern video game history. So let's break it down. It's time for the vertical slice. Just imagine some kind of a After Effects animation there. I had to kind of build this whole video series project from scratch. I didn't have time to do the After Effects animation or the graphic design for the logo, though I will for the next time. Also, imagine there's some kind of a sponsor logo. There's some kind of like a knife company. Is there a knife company out there that wants to sponsor a sword company? There aren't a lot of sword companies anymore. What about like a hatchet company? Is there a hatchet company that would want to sponsor this segment? I don't need any of your hatchets. Just send me some money. Vertical slice is a video game industry term referring to a portion of a video game which contains at least one instance of every feature in the game. A vertical slice serves as a proof of concept for investors wanting to fund the game, for example. Maybe the investor wants to see a little bit of everything that's going to be in the game. Most investors who ask developers to make a vertical slice love to use the metaphor of a layer cake. They say a vertical slice should contain a little bit of each layer of the cake. Therefore, vertical slices are mostly a hypothetical concept, and anyone asking for a vertical slice is usually an idiot who does not understand that you do not bake a cake one slice at a time. You bake a whole cake. You idiot. You can't say it's 1/8 of the work to make a single slice of pizza versus making an entire pizza. To make one slice of pizza, you have to make a whole pizza and then cut it. I've decided to reclaim and rebrand the phrase vertical slice for my own personal reasons. In this segment of Action Button Reviews, I'll observe a finished game and attempt to extract and dissect a single portion of the game that contains a little bit of everything that is in the game, excluding, for example, one-time minigames like the Final Fantasy VII Remake's spectacular rhythm game dance number, which is absolutely one of the best things I have ever seen in any piece of media in my entire life. Now that I've finished defining vertical slice in this episode, I won't have to do it again, and I'm sure none of you will ever forget that description. With all that out of the way, the Final Fantasy VII Remake insidiously evaded my attempts to discern a tidy vertical slice. A typical game might have an extractable, hindsightable vertical slice of more or less an hour in length. It turns out that the Final Fantasy VII Remake's perplexingly peculiar pacing incorporates elements from such a wide variety of modern AAA video games that the briefest vertical slice I was able to discern amounted to 8 hours, 2 minutes, 3 seconds, and 52 frames of the game as I played it on my final 100% playthrough. That's a lot! Now, that number does include every side quest of a particular side quest hub of the game. I personally consider every side quest to be essential when we're talking about doing side quests with Cloud's true girlfriend, Aerith. Though for the sake of argument, if we consider a side quest to be one of the essential elements of the Final Fantasy VII Remake, we can cut this number down to 5 hours, 59 minutes, 37 seconds, and 6 frames. That's still pretty huge. What this magnitudinous number demonstrates is that the Final Fantasy VII Remake is changing moods, styles, and tones, almost, though never quite to the extent of changing genres, so frequently and erratically that several of its core game flow modes get passed over during a rotation. This vindicates my timid hypothesis that the game's overarching structure was never, strictly speaking, focus tested or workshopped. They started from Final Fantasy VII 1997 and said, let's build a bunch of stuff on top of this. To illustrate what I'm getting at here, I should tell you that I played all the way through the Final Fantasy VII Remake on normal mode 4 times, starting from 0 each time. I did not use New Game Plus. I played it through on hard mode once, though we'll get to that near the end of this review. My first playthrough took me 38 hours and 38 minutes. My second, more thorough playthrough took me 40 hours and 18 minutes. I then played through the game in 26 hours and 22 minutes, skipping many, though not all, of the cutscenes, and simulating a hard mode loadout. For example, I did not use items in this playthrough. My luxurious fourth 100% playthrough took me 45 hours, 50 minutes, and 54 seconds. I conducted a chapter-by-chapter analysis of the vertical slice of the first and last playthroughs, and a chapter-by-chapter analysis of the entire last playthrough. I moved video clips to different tracks and color-coded them according to the game's quote-unquote mode. Here you're looking at one sequence for reference. Battles are red, cutscenes are yellow, uninterrupted traversals to and from exact mandatory points A and points B are green. Minigames or puzzle solvings are purple. Time spent in menus is brown. I ran various analytical calculations on this data, much of which falls outside the scope of this video review. Though rest assured, I have made meticulous notes in a secret spreadsheet. and I will continue to update that spreadsheet throughout this series. Thanks to this laborious, brain-breaking process, I can rattle off with confidence such facts as the player spends a total of 16 minutes, 14 seconds, and 16 frames climbing ladders in the Final Fantasy VII Remake, though only if they climb all of them at the normal speed, both going up and coming down, because only narcs slide down ladders. I can tell you that I slid down only 18 of the game's ladders. I can say that I spent exactly 9 hours, 27 minutes, 57 seconds, and 53 frames in battles, and that the longest amount of time in the game between two mandatory battles at a leisurely pace with no sprinting, because sprinting is for narcs, is 1 hour, 55 minutes, 13 seconds, and 32 frames. The second longest time gap between two mandatory story battles is 1 hour, 16 minutes, 55 seconds, and 7 frames. Both of those numbers are if you don't skip cutscenes. And if you consider the motorcycle minigames battles, which I guess I do, though begrudgingly because they're not very good battles. Upon a glance at a zoomed out sequence, we can generally see the way the game flows within a single chapter. Interestingly, no single chapter of this game contains what I would define as a vertical slice. When I said earlier that I picked the worst possible game with which to start this series, I was more right than even I knew going in. I'd suspect that with just about any AAA prestige game out there, anything either I or the game itself would determine to be a chapter would contain at least a little bit of every core mechanic or system of the game. Now, if I were a much more boring person, I would say that the Final Fantasy VII Remake's core features were dungeons, battles, towns, and side quests. Furthermore, I'd stretch this ever so slightly to include cutscenes. Let's face it, cutscenes were a core feature of Final Fantasy VII 1997, and they are a core feature of the Final Fantasy VII Remake. However, I've ascertained what I consider to be a multitude of game flavors. The Final Fantasy VII Remake does not just have dungeons and towns and battles. It has 2 distinctly different types of dungeon, 2 distinctly different types of town, and 4 distinctly different types of battle. I could actually argue that it has distinctly 8 different types of battles, though let's not get too technical just yet. Besides, it does only have 1 type of side quest.
This sucks.
And now, I'd like to present the game flavors I was able to extract from the Final Fantasy VII Remake. Also, if, for example, you represent an energy drink brand, and you would like to sponsor the Game Flavors segment of Action Button Reviews, I have placed my business inquiry email address in my Twitter profile. I don't need you to send me energy drinks, I just need you to send me an SVG of your logo and some money. Game flavor number 1. Arcade strips. Chapters 1, 5, 10, and 15 consist entirely of single-location, straight-ahead, no-nonsense dungeon trekking. This is dungeon flavor 1 of 2, if you are keeping score. For these segments, all of them less than an hour in length, the player experiences minimal to no opportunity to get lost. These feel like Final Fantasy XIII zones, or Call of Duty levels. Guided by your party banter, you move forward, fighting several thrilling battles, contending with a big boss at the end, or at the beginning, as in the case of Chapter 10. Of all the Final Fantasy VII Remake's game flavors, these are the ones that stylistically owe the most to the Kingdom Hearts series. For these chapters, the Final Fantasy VII Remake becomes the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles the arcade game of itself. Seriously, these chapters are as big a thrill for Final Fantasy VII loving me at age 40 as the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles the arcade game was for me at age 13. I played Chapter 15 literally 8 times. Chapter 12 also almost completely consists of an arcade strip, though it features an interstitial injection of a prestige tour. Game flavor number 2. prestige tours. These scenes consist of the player simply manipulating a character through some kind of slow-paced, atmospheric, environmental storytelling sorta world-building segment. Any battles are ultra-light. No chapter fully consists of a prestige tour, though Chapter 2, wherein Cloud clambers across rooftops and first-hand witnesses the damage done by the Mako reactor explosion, comes closest. The majority of that chapter has Cloud walking and looking and reacting. Near the end, there's a thrilling medium-big fight against a bunch of grunts, though exactly 92.4% of this chapter consists of simply moseying from point A to point B. Do you like how I got through that whole thing without saying walking simulator? Game flavor number 3. Side Quest Hub. Chapters 3, 8, and 14 of the Final Fantasy VII Remake dump the player off in a large, friendly zone peppered with quest givers. Chapters 8 and 14 prominently feature defined ending set pieces. In Chapter 8's case, it's a boss battle. In Chapter 14, it's a retread of a previous dungeon, complete with a revamped boss battle. All 3 of these chapters focus primarily on world building. We learn about the world of Final Fantasy VII while we acquiesce to the mundane requests of surreally uninteresting fictional individuals. Again, here's Cloud literally saying in so many words that a particular side quest sucks.
This sucks.
That's a side quest where you literally have to find 3 white cats in a city that has the landmark ability of a literal junkyard. The Final Fantasy VII Remake's side quest hub chapters require the player to complete at least one of the optional quests before their final goals open up. Though doing all of the side quests in a hub results in multiple small tangible benefits, and at least one large tangible benefit. In the case of Chapters 3 and 8, doing all the side quests reflects in the narrative of Chapter 9. We could loosely describe the Final Fantasy VII Remake's first 2 side quest hubs as dates. In the first one, Tifa is showing her old friend Cloud around town, helping him earn some money by introducing him to some people who need odd jobs done. There are literally 2 zones of their town, one junkyard and one abandoned factory, that are full of monsters whose population requires occasional thinning by the neighborhood watch. These side quests thus contextualize grinding. We could, if we wanted to, call them grind quests. These grind quests also provide ample role-playing opportunity for the player to witness and hang out with Tifa and Cloud's relationship, and then Aerith and Cloud's relationship. We experience their character growth on an intermediate level through quest dialogues, and on a micro level in post-battle banter. It's neat.
Keep those gloves up.
Sure thing, Coach.
Most of the side quests are just kill a monster somewhere, though, and every time they try to pretend this game is The Witcher 3, it's like every character involved in the dialogue throws up at the same time.
There's no denying you're the real deal. Not like these idiots with their excuses.
They're just doing their jobs.
Hell with you. We can take care of this town ourselves. No more mercs or Shinra. We'll build up the watch and kick you all out.
Okay then. That's another solid gig in the books.
Game flavor number 4. Non sequiturs and mandatory minigames. Chapter 4 consists of a deep dive into the backstory of Jessie. In Final Fantasy VII 1997, Jessie was a severely minor character who exists primarily to flirt with Cloud in a few early dialogues, giving us the sense that this Lego guy with toasters for hands named Cloud is sexually attractive to somebody. The remake's whole thing is stretching out and beefing up, so previously paper-thin individuals have become robustians of personality. Biggs has anxiety and used to be a teacher at an orphanage school. Wedge loves cats and is always hungry. And Jessie is both a former actress and monster horny. She ropes Cloud into a full excursion into territory entirely outside the original game's purview. This is the game showing us, as early as it can, that they have added some big new stuff. To impress us with the bigness of the newness, the chapter opens with a high-speed, action-gamey motorcycle ride not present in any form in the original game. During this whole motorcycle ride, Jessie constantly acts like she and Cloud are much closer than they really are, just to make Biggs and Wedge jealous. Wow. This chapter reminded me quite uncomfortably of like half the dates I have ever been on in my life. Whether I'm saying I was like Cloud or Biggs and Wedge, I'll leave that up to you. They even introduce a new character who exists just in this chapter. Hopefully he's in the remake part 2 because I like him. In Japanese, he's voiced by the guy who voices All Might in My Hero Academia. Neat. Chapter 4 progresses from a motorcycle minigame to a prestige tour and concludes with an arena-style action battle. The game impresses the player with multiple out-of-right-field elements of a big prestige game, and then ends with an impressive boss. These are quote-unquote filler episodes, both literally and mechanically. Game flavor number 5. Dungeons. In Chapter 6, Cloud, Barrett, and Tifa go to a huge Costco in search of one particular item. Just like the Costco near my apartment in Brooklyn on a Saturday, the place is teeming with mutants. Chapters 11 and 17 also prominently feature similar enormous get-losty environments. These dungeons have all the grace and symmetry of 9 Doom 64 levels glued together. I mean that as a compliment. There's no grace and no symmetry or congruity at all. These dungeons are headachy nightmares, each containing multiple quote-unquote discoveries, which is what the game calls side objectives that are not quite as long and boring as full side quests. Discoveries require the player to scrutinize the level design a little more carefully than they'd have to in order to simply plow through to the boss. In Chapter 6, this involves killing some optional hard monsters, maneuvering a moving walkway to access a materia, maneuvering another moving walkway to knock some boxes off some shelves, and exterminating some creatures inside of a ventilation fan system. These dungeons all effortlessly evoke the cold, kitchen-sinkly get-lostiness of an ancient PlayStation 1 role-playing game dungeon in an impressive manner. I'd thought the AAA industry at large gave up on these kinds of meandering trial-and-error boxes. Thanks for bringing it back, game flavor. Number 6. Opera houses. I fittingly derive the name of this game flavor from the Final Fantasy franchise itself. We can largely divide the pacing of Final Fantasy stories into pre-Opera House and post-Opera House. The Opera House in Final Fantasy VI arrived to thunderous applause back in 1994, where a large number of players had never seen anything like it. In Final Fantasy VI's Opera House, players play the role of a girl playing the role of an opera singer in order to attract the attention of a would-be kidnapper. This sequence involves one character needing to learn the lines of the opera so as to not ruin the performance, and the other characters needing to thwart a particularly violent heckler in the rafters. If you're not familiar with the Opera House, it is definitely an important piece of video game narrative design history. Final Fantasy VI had one Opera House set piece, which just so happened to be the actual Opera House. Chrono Trigger had several Opera Houses. Final Fantasy VII presented players with multiple Opera Houses of theretofore unseen, tempestuous complexity. The opening segment of Final Fantasy VII, Midgar, contained 2 such opera houses, one of them being Wall Market, where Cloud has to quest around a red light district, collecting parts for an outfit so he can dress up like a girl and infiltrate a rich man's house. Midgar's other opera house is the Shinra Tower, where our heroes Cloud, Barrett, and Tifa need to work their way up a corporate office building, one floor at a time. The Final Fantasy VII Remake presents luxuriously enormous renditions of both of these opera houses. The Wall Market segment in particular stands out. In my recent replay of Midgar 1997, Wall Market lasted just under 1 hour. In Midgar 2020, Wall Market lasted me 5 hours and 7 minutes, and that was when I went the route that involved doing the fewest side quests. That's the route where you choose to get the rich man's hand massage. Wow, the rich man's hand massage scene is hot. This is a million times hotter than any BioWare sex scene I've ever watched on YouTube with arms akimbo, and it's just a person touching another person's hand. Opera houses are big, bold, multi-tone set pieces containing a clockwork microstructure of interlocking side quests. These are the Final Fantasy VII Remake's main courses, and they are spectacular. In a BioWare game, you might conduct quote-unquote romance by acquiescing to the conversational preferences of a surreally uninteresting fictional individual. In the Final Fantasy VII Remake, romance involves this. You know, someone told me you can make Aerith mad if you flub all the inputs in the dance minigame. I sure never saw that because I'm not a freak. Wow. Actually, everyone in this game is really horny. Look at Reno's chest. Tifa's post-battle banter consists primarily of 2 repeated lines. That she's worked up a good sweat.
Worked up a good sweat.
Or that she'd kill for a shower.
Would kill for a shower.
She really wants us to think of her
Wet flesh.
You know, fan fiction of the sex variety did not exactly not exist back in 1997. Though I feel like right here in 2020, Square Enix is confirming that they have definitely seen some of it. Game flavor number let's call it 6.5. The side quests themselves. They all technically take place inside the designated side quest hub chapters, though can I just say that I definitely get a unique flavor out of all of them? I mean, most of them suck. Most of them are just about going to a place and killing a monster for no particular reason. One of those monsters is enthrallingly fun to kill. The rest, I could take or leave. The Final Fantasy VII Remake bookends these side quests with stilted dialogues, though there's never any enjoyable or even meaningful story being achieved. The side quests are just there for world-building flavor. To be honest, these side quests feel increasingly pace-breaking as the game goes along. The first time we do side quests, it's with Tifa in Chapter 3. This is our quote-unquote date with Tifa. At this point in the story, Cloud doesn't have any purpose in his life. The next time we do side quests, it's in Chapter 8, on our quote-unquote date with Aerith. In this case, Cloud has places to be. He really shouldn't be messing around. This is proof that Aerith is, of course, his real girlfriend. He's willing to abandon the entire narrative of this meticulously plotted, extremely expensive, high-budget video game just so he can hang out with her. Then, in Chapter 14, we get the biggest bounty of side quests, though we're also facing the biggest, most mortal deadline. Weirdly, it feels like most of these Chapter 14 side quests don't even want to be in this game at all, because 2/3 of them matryoshka into each other, almost like the designers knew that none of them were interesting enough to leave by itself, and their placement in the game undermines the urgency of the plot big time. You know what, though? This reminds me of the original Final Fantasy VII, in which we bred racing birds, despite knowing that the world was going to end in 7 days. So I'll allow it. Anyway, that's all of our game flavors. Each chapter showcases one particular game flavor. By 1/3 of the way through the game, we've sampled all of the game flavors except the Opera House flavor, which occurs in Chapter 9. As the game goes on, it begins weaving more and more flavors together at once, accomplishing a slick feat wherein no 2 chapters exactly feel the same. I'll say this again later, though I couldn't help recalling the structure and flow of my favorite PlayStation 1 RPGs throughout this experience. It's like the makers subconsciously accounted for every nuance. For example, in Chapter 13, you backtrack through a sequence of painstakingly slow-paced puzzles that you solved back at the beginning of Chapter 9, immediately before you entered the massive, meticulous Opera Housey set-piecey wall market segment. The magnitude of that set piece and the following dungeons, boss battles, and melodramatic cutscenes weigh heavy on your brain, burying the memory of those glacial, idiosyncratic robotic arm manipulating riddles. Thus, the Final Fantasy VII Remake works its trick. It makes a few hours ago feel like a million years ago. With Swiss watchmakerly elegance, this modern remake of an ancient game expresses with level design one of its forebears' most potent sensations, that of backtracking to a previous trouble zone, and summarily stomping all random challengers. You step back into this chamber and through a shower of recollection. When you say, "I remember this place," you're thinking of those insipid and lengthy work-like struggle puzzles. Lo and voila, what once took you 10 minutes, 10 seconds, and 39 frames now takes you 29 seconds and 59 frames. Now that's a character development you can take to the bank. The Final Fantasy VII Remake seasons these game flavors with two spices: cutscenes and battles. If you're here for one, you're here for the other. The Final Fantasy VII Remake treats each cutscene like a major motion picture, and treats every small-scale battle like nobody ever got annoyed by a random battle back in the day. As I said earlier, I spent 9 hours, 27 minutes, 57 seconds, and 53 frames in battles during my 100% leisurely playthrough of the Final Fantasy VII Remake. That's 20.64% of the game time. If we subtract cutscenes from that, that's 25.48% of the game time. That's officially more than 1/4 of the game. I'll go one further. If we consider the time spent in menus, equipping or upgrading weapons, or equipping and arranging materia, battle activities, then battles account for 31.49% of the game if we include cutscenes, and 38.87% of the game if we're talking about just the directly playable parts of the game. In other words, miraculously, the Final Fantasy VII Remake has less battle than it has other stuff. If we divided up a flagship prestige game into combat and other stuff, how would they do? Does The Last of Us contain more or less than 38% combat? It does have all those ladder puzzles in it, though are they substantial enough to knock the combat percentage down below 38%? I don't think so. Though you know what? I'll take that challenge. So for today, the Final Fantasy VII Remake shows us a huge budget prestige video game where elements other than combat clearly occupy the majority portion of the game, no matter how we slice it. Of course, a lot of that other 2.2% of that time, that's 30 minutes and 6 seconds, is spent climbing ladders or squeezing under rubble. 8 minutes and 12 seconds of that time is spent holding the triangle button for 3 seconds while you wait for a door to open. Look at this part where you have to hold the triangle button to open 3 doors in a row. Is this some kind of IQ test? It reminds me of the time I slipped an "Are you even reading this?" into my homework for Mrs. Parker Davis, and she docked me a percentage point for using an auxiliary be verb. Every time you challenge the reader's attention, somebody punishes somebody. I mean, this is 8.3 seconds of holding a button down. I know, it's a trick for hiding loads. I know the developers mean well when they ask me to squeeze under all this rubble and through all these cracks. I know it's meant to heighten the drama, to get me into character by letting me watch my characters involved in a quiet, intimate struggle, though it has an extreme tendency to get glacial. I always wind up getting excited about what the game's loading on the other side of these things. And you spend 46 minutes, 30 seconds, and 32 frames of a 100% complete playthrough of the game, departing from the correct path during a dungeon or corridor level to open a treasure chest containing an item that would be completely unusable in a hard mode playthrough, and then returning to the path. That's 3.41% of the playable game outside battles. You spent 23 seconds and 24 frames watching and waiting for Red 13 to flip a switch 8 times in Chapter 17. You spend 2 minutes, 56 seconds, and 5 frames crawling forward through the air vents at Shinra Tower. You spend 4 minutes, 10 seconds, and 28 frames watching Tifa perform a kindergarten Uncharted routine. Tifa's Tomb Raider for babies makes me feel bad about saying bad stealth segments are the worst part of AAA games. Every glacial cinematic action here takes between 8 and 12 seconds longer than your brain's capacity to discern the solution. You sight the goal, tilt the stick, and wait for the girl inside the television to graduate video kindergarten. This is 0.56% of the game, if you get the items, and 0.305% of the game if you speedrun it. I guess if you stare at anything long enough, it wastes your time. I don't get it. The Final Fantasy VII Remake forces me to slow down for these little, insipid, junior crew set pieces with chandeliers and air ducts. And then, when I'm trying to dramatically mosey in character during some of the heaviest dramatic moments, my AI buddies are in such a buzz-killing hurry. Just let me roleplay, man. In other words, congratulations, everybody. We've invented a 61.13% non-violent prestige video game of over 40 hours in length. Having said that, 38% is still a lot. In fact, this makes battle, without a doubt, the single most frequently occurring aspect of the game. Back in 1999, every dude on my college dorm floor at Indiana University in Bloomington, Indiana, NASCAR or Formula One, jock or cool guy, NFL or NBA, liberal arts or business college, pre-med or pre-law, virgin or laid, Sega or Nintendo, fake ID or no fake ID, rock and roll or techno, every dude had at least once, arms akimbo, spectated Knights of the Round in Final Fantasy VII. Dudes would be like,
"You should check out that Knights of the Round if you haven't, dude."
And dudes would just know that it was a Final Fantasy VII thing. At least every dude on the floor had played the bombing mission, seen the final boss and ending, received a burned CDR with One Winged Angel on it, in addition to several songs by Everclear and Sugar Ray, and they had seen Knights of the Round. The rest of Final Fantasy VII they could take or leave. I remember 4 guys who reported that they had tried to get into the game, yet it just didn't grab them. All 4 of them had been lured by that sexy image of Cloud Strife holding a big sword with bad butt Chinese writing etched into the blade, sitting astride a fat motorcycle in front of a red sky, as seen on the wall scroll hanging in 2 of the math majors' rooms. They said they just couldn't enjoy the game at all. They all complained about the random battles. These guys obviously all owned PlayStations. All 4 of them owned and regularly played Madden. 3 of them had beaten Metal Gear Solid. One of them actually went on to beat the first disc of Xenogears, and then somebody else on the floor had borrowed my second disc of Xenogears. I got it back from him before the end of the year. He never got to borrow the second disc, and I kind of feel like maybe that's given him a favorable impression of role-playing games. I remember each of these guys' names, physical attributes, and musical preferences. Knowing what I know of today's youth, I can tell you with confidence that if they had been born 10 years later, at least 2 of them would daily watch esports on Twitch. This probably has something, if not a lot, to do with the Final Fantasy VII Remake's combat system. The Final Fantasy VII Remake seeks to imbue each individual battle, however mundane, with at least a splinter of the appeal of Knights of the Round. Many battles are big, lavishly designed spectacles. Even some of the quote-unquote random battles occur in scripted, level-designed locations. Short battles can last for between 9 seconds and 2 minutes. The pace is breezy, the action is crispy, the weapons feel heavy and good. And I distinctly recall never once being annoyed that I'd gotten into a battle. I did get annoyed for a few distinct moments during some battles. In fact, I can recall several instances when I was frustrated that I could not find an enemy to fight when I wanted to fight an enemy. Each ability, spell, weapon, and accessory is as though designed under a fancy microscope. Each mechanically unique character is a full game unto themselves. Therefore, when I say the game features 8 kinds of battles, I ain't even kidding. Cloud fights some battles alone, some battles with just Barret, some battles with just Tifa, some battles with just Aerith, some battles with Barret and Tifa, some battles with Tifa and Aerith, and some battles with Aerith and Barret. Furthermore, you fight one boss as Tifa and Barret, one boss as Tifa and Aerith, and one boss as Barret and Aerith. I think the evidence points to the designers having meticulously tested and balanced every possible combination of 2 or 3 party members. This is why you can't control Red 13. They weren't going to pour thousands of hours of design work into a character who only appears for one chapter. The complexity of the characters' mechanical differences means that the battles stay fresh, exciting, and just out of the mastery grasp of your brain's fingertips. I wouldn't say that each party lineup is a quote-unquote whole different game, though I would say that each party lineup is sort of a whole different Japanese role-playing game battle system. In other words, this battle system gives us a whole lot to talk about. So let's get to it. I'll start with a quick breakdown. Actually, I just had a ridiculously good idea for a name of the segment for the show. Ready for this? You ready for this? Because the 3 letters of my first name also form an acronym for The Instruction Manual, I'll start with a quick breakdown. The Final Fantasy VII Remake uses a real-time, action-skinned role-playing combat system. At the time I made this review, the game was only available for the PlayStation 4 in 30 frames per second, so I'm going to use PlayStation button names. If you're watching this after the glorious PC version has come out, well, use the left analog stick to move your character. Press the square button to attack. Press the R1 button to block. Look at the 2 bars under your characters' names in the lower right corner. These are called ATB bars. ATB stands for Active Time Battle, the name of the bad, yet well-meaning and somehow classic Final Fantasy battle system introduced in Final Fantasy IV in 1991. As you attack enemies or simply kill time by blocking or moving in circles, these bars fill up. When one is full, your character has accumulated an ATB charge. You can spend 1 ATB bar to use an available ability, magic spell, or item. Most ATB actions cost 1 ATB bar. Some of them cost 2. Some of them cost 1 to start, though we'll use 2 for a more powerful version if you have 2 ATB bars available. In Final Fantasy IV, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9, the ATB bar represented a character's readiness to receive any command at all. And yes, I know that Final Fantasy IV did not have visible ATB bars. Trust me, the ATB bars were there, we just couldn't see them. Simply attacking an enemy with your regular boring weapon required a full ATB bar in the old unremade Final Fantasies. And yes, I know Final Fantasy IV has been remade, however, it does not run at a silky smooth 60 FPS on my PC, so remake it again, ya punks. The Final Fantasy VII Remake, in functionally speaking the visual language of action games, can't have you waiting around between each sword swing. Only a bad game would do that. Your regular attacks in the Final Fantasy VII Remake send off wonderful particle effects and build your ATB charges faster than simply standing around. Your AI teammates don't build ATB very well on their own, so you'll have to use the up and down directional buttons to change to your teammates to pull off some regular attacks every once in a while. All of your teammates feel incredibly different to control, by the way. Cloud magnetizes to the nearest enemy when you press the attack button. Tifa doesn't, though she runs twice as quickly as Cloud. She feels more like an action game character. Barret is big and slow and can confidently hit anybody from anywhere, tempting you to keep him at a distance, though he's also your tank, so get him in there. That's interesting. When anyone on your team has an ATB charge ready, you can press either trigger to open their action menu, turning the game into a turn-based RPG for a couple of seconds. Like its combat design cousin Kingdom Hearts, the Final Fantasy VII Remake allows players to assemble a list of hotkeys. You can access these by holding the L1 button and then pressing the face button corresponding to the move you want to use. I gotta say, I wish they let me map moves to the triggers too, though I guess pressing the left trigger while holding the L1 button down would feel weird to people who aren't playing on a SCUF Vantage 2 controller with the L1 button mapped to a rear paddle. That's luxury. SCUF Vantage 2, when you absolutely need to spend $200 on a PlayStation 4 controller. In addition to switching to characters to build their ATB bars, you'll also want to switch to them because each specific battle might benefit from your directly controlling a character other than Big Sword Guy. If a battle includes a lot of obnoxious airborne enemies, for example, Barret has a gun for a primary weapon, so use him. At the core of every encounter is the stagger system. This works similarly to the break system in Final Fantasy XIII. Actually, I know it's called the break system in the Japanese version of Final Fantasy XIII. I don't know if it's called that in the English version of Final Fantasy XIII. I could fact check it, however, it would be more fun not to. Attacking an enemy in a specific manner will induce a status clearly labeled with big ugly text as pressured. Inducing pressured status requires either common sense, robots hate lightning for example, reading of visual cues, or some light puzzle solving that requires using the scanner ability and reading a wall of sometimes imperfectly translated text detailing the enemy's patterns, behaviors, and elemental weaknesses or resistances. An enemy in pressured status can be quickly staggered by a few boilerplate attack abilities. These are clearly labeled as focused attacks. Focused Strike for Tifa, Focused Thrust for Cloud, and Focused Shot for Barret. Focused attacks do decent damage on their own under regular circumstances, though if the stars align and you have ATB bars in the chamber when an enemy enters the pressure zone, you can quickly induce a stagger state by lining your dudes up and pummeling the idiot with focused attacks. A staggered enemy has virtually no defenses. They can't act. They're a complete husk. Hit them with anything to hurt them. Hit them with their weaknesses to devastate them. Hit them with a limit break to feel like the real monster. This is sometimes deliciously easier said than done. Learning to muscle memorize ATB cooldowns and attack windups becomes a tug of war in your mind, representing the perfect source of virtually all the pleasure you will derive or not from this game's combat system. Stagger is in fact so important that Tifa's perma-available starting regular actions exist primarily to increase the damage bonus percentage during an enemy's stagger phase. Aside from a few other details, that's basically the entire battle system. If you're a newcomer or non-game player, I might have made it sound a little scary and complex. That's because it sort of is. Every good RPG has a technical, higher level of battle play. It's up to the player if they want to learn it. You can enjoy the Final Fantasy VII Remake as a sort of arcade game beat-em-up version of itself, though you might not have that great of a time, especially in fights that force you to pay attention, like the one against the Heck House or Rufus. Few RPGs, even the most hardcore of the actual old ones, require their players to generally pay as much attention to the higher level elements of their battle systems as the Final Fantasy VII Remake does. That's probably because the designers seem to have taken their inspirations from esports, as any action or role-playing game designer is wont to do these days. So let's break it down in a little bit more technical detail. ATB charges in the Final Fantasy VII Remake occupy the role of a defamiliarized esports cooldown. In a more complex MOBA or other esport, the word cooldown typically applies separately to a wide range of abilities of various tiers. One of the first and most valuable lessons you learn while playing a MOBA like League of Legends as a complete noob is to just use your abilities when they're ready. Don't let them sit there. You can learn the right timing to use them later. You can learn to strategize with them later. First, you've got to learn how to just use them when you can. This lesson is brutally important because when every single ability has a cooldown of a sometimes microscopically different speed attached to it, you are going to need to eventually tattoo the lengths of those cooldowns onto your brain. The Final Fantasy VII Remake uses its ATB bars as white label cooldowns. Think of them as action coupons, each of them redeemable for one fancy action of your choice. Some fancy actions cost 2. Having the proper fancy actions available at the most opportune times always feels like a gamble, until you've bent the system and broken the system, at which time it feels like esports. The Final Fantasy VII Remake's combat design staff have clearly had their eyes on esports for the past decade. I mean, the Final Fantasy VII Remake's combat design staff literally includes veterans of Kingdom Hearts 2. If you can get even part of your head around Kingdom Hearts, you can probably memorize the names of at least 10% of the League of Legends champions. I yelled esports a lot during my streams. On the one hand, this was a good joke. On the other hand, why not? The Final Fantasy VII Remake represents the latest attempt by prestige game designers to adapt esports mechanics for the mainstream. I'm no esports elitist, so I say, this is great. Esports relish in many mechanics of objective satisfaction. I think we should all look at esports. For example, in popularizing the almighty cooldown, esports have translated the shocking thrill of a stockbroker's heart attack directly onto every game liker's 240 Hz computer monitor. Esports thrill players with the sensation of a Twitch speed NASDAQ, successfully predicting that you will be ready to perform one exact action at one particular possible future moment makes you feel like a psychic. Whiff your ultimate, and you might accidentally also jump out of a real-life window. In a multiplayer online game where other people's psychologies make up 94% of the soup stock, this bartering, bargaining, and bluffing on ultra-short-term investments and payoffs fascinates and thrills in a manner definitively deserving of ESPN coverage. In a single-player game, however, any designer insisting on speaking in a language of warm-ups and cooldowns should rightly receive many Larry David squints. At lower difficulties, as the Final Fantasy VII Remake lowers you into its battle system toes first, the introduction of every additional mechanic feels good, right, and super occasionally triumphant. Later, as conflicts grow hot, we glimpse the face of the gremlin beneath the veneer. We dig in a fingernail, and what do you know? It turns out this baseball is made of cotton candy. A lot of times, quote, getting good, unquote, at a particular video game means getting good at dealing with nonsense. The degree of pleasantness we palpate via this nonsense helps us formulate our opinion of a game as good or bad. However, as someone who has designed for games and even made a few tiny complete games just for myself, I have seen the trick. Games are not real. On normal difficulty, the Final Fantasy VII Remake allows casual players the opportunity to rent esports thrills. If you poke its systems full of enough holes, you'll see that the game is only offering the player the opportunity to play the role of a player playing an esports game. For example, if pressuring and staggering enemies is such a core part of the system, why can't the enemies stagger me? The simple answer is because single-player video games are liars. I played through the Final Fantasy VII Remake on normal mode 4 times and hard mode once. I insisted on replaying normal mode 4 times, starting from 0 each time because it literally has the word normal in its name. This seems to me suspiciously like the developers claiming that this is the quote-unquote real mode. There's a separately labeled easy mode. Hard mode is not available from the title screen. The developers present hard mode as a treat for freaks, unlockable only after completing the game on normal mode. For the purpose of my analysis, I considered the unlockable nature of hard mode an indicator that I should scrutinize the normal mode most heavily. So I did. The Final Fantasy VII Remake introduces systems and elements surprisingly quickly for a Final Fantasy game. The ethereal brain experience points you earn through completing the game on normal mode once carry over interestingly well, turning a repeat from 0 normal mode playthrough into a sort of philosophical New Game Plus. The first time I played normal mode, I didn't get into the groove of always using Cloud's Punisher mode to counter certain enemies' melee attacks until a few chapters in. My second time through, I was parrying dudes right at the start. I humiliated the Chapter 4 boss my second time through. It felt great. My first time through the game, switching between party members with super regularity during a battle felt exciting. It felt dramatic. From just a user interface perspective, it satisfied me. The little freeze frame as the camera perspective jumps is a wonderful flourish. My second time through, at some point, perfectly on accident, I glimpsed the Aleph under the stairs. My first playthrough, I'd complained maybe 500,000 times that my AI buddies were too stupid to exist. Well, the 500,001st complaint broke the bank. My buds aren't just dumb, they're idiots. And they're not just idiots, they're idiots by design, by game design. Also, it seems like the combat design gets off on making you feel bad about yourself. Like, bosses often change phases just as you're about to stagger them, which resets their stagger meter. It's like the combat designers know exactly how quickly you can stagger the boss, and the exact minimum amount of damage the boss can take in the process of getting to that stagger, and then they set the next phase to start slightly above that. Check out Rude here. You can see his stagger meter reset within 1 frame, shamelessly, before the phase change cutscene. It's like he's rubbing it in my face. How namesakely of him. Also, here he is initiating his post-battle cutscene before the final hit of Cloud's limit break. What the heck, man? I developed a laundry list of similar complaints about the battle system by the end of my 26-hour cutscene skipping second playthrough. I then played through the first chapter on hard mode with an endgame party at around level 35. I found it a tiny bit too strict, though for the most part I enjoyed myself. With this experience, I adjusted my perspective and replayed the game from 0 on normal again, simulating what I imagined to be a hard mode loadout. Hard mode doesn't let the player use items, so for my third playthrough, I did not use items. Well, I did use 2 Phoenix Downs, though only so I didn't have to redo an entire boss fight. I could have done it if I had had the raise materia equipped on Barret as I thought I had. My hypothesis was that a playthrough on normal, simulating hard mode's restrictions, might enlighten me about the deepest levels of the game's design. I was particularly interested in observing the difficulty curve and progression, and the increased complexity of the metagame. The only thing I wasn't able to simulate in this playthrough was hard mode's restriction on benches. In normal mode, they recover your magic points. In hard mode, they don't. I came away with 2 distinct impressions. Firstly, that Cloud's triple slash move is overpowered. Secondly, that a lot of stuff is overpowered, though it's not quite the stuff you'd expect. I had yet to consult YouTube about hard mode strategies at this point, though by chapter 5 of my normal mode replay, I was able to piece together the way a hard mode playthrough would have to work. If benches don't restore your MP, you're going to need both high MP and some healing abilities that use ATB without also using MP. This means for hard mode, you need to prioritize leveling up the chakra materia, which heals a percentage of the user's HP, and the prayer materia, which heals a little bit of everyone's HP. You need to fill your boys and girls with HP up and MP up materia. You need to give everyone healing materia just in case. And you need to make ample use of the haste spell, which causes everyone to build ATB faster. You need to be smart about your crowd control moves like Cloud's triple slash, Tifa's star shower, and Barret's maximum fury. You need to make ample use of Aerith's arcane ward, which places a field upon which any spellcaster casts every spell twice. You need to drill down hard on the correct strategies for pressuring every enemy. And you need to make timely use of focused abilities to stagger enemies whenever possible. During the pressuring phase, you need to use Tifa's unbridled strength ability multiple times to charge her triangle button ability up to maximum stagger damage multiplier percentage so you can make the most of every stagger. Because even every random enemy is generally on max stats in hard mode, there's no shame to grinding up to the level cap of level 50. And of course, since you can only play hard mode in New Game Plus, you get all of your late game materia and equipment from the start. When I did look at YouTubers' hard mode runs, I enjoyed learning that I had been mostly correct in my concept of an ideal loadout. This hypothetical hard mode loadout also made normal mode breezier and, dare I say, more exciting. However, it also required me to spend 22% more time in menus fiddling with my materia configurations. In hard mode, I'd just have started out with all of those endgame materia. This exercise gave me a lot of takeaways, many of which we don't have time to get into in this video. For example, I don't care how many times you've been through the game, you're constantly wheeling the camera around so much during every battle, and the level designs all look like one The Matrix-colored Shadow Moses Costco or another, that by the end of every battle, you are either completely turned around or you can play Quake 2 with your eyes closed. And no, I am not ever going to turn the minimap on. A lot of my battle footage wound up unusable because if one character's HP enters critical status, they throw this red mist filter over the whole screen. Developers put an option in the options menu that lets people turn off the weird "you're in danger" graphical effects. I ended up with literally 900 words of notes about the materia menu. In my script writing process, I made an attempt to condense that into fewer words. The materia menu is depressing. Materia is a beloved concept from the original Final Fantasy VII. Materia are little multicolored candy bubble orbs that players slot into individual characters as weapons, receiving abilities, magic spells, or passive traits in so doing. As you fight battles, you earn AP. Ability points, which go toward leveling up the materia. Level up a materia to unlock new skills, spells, or traits. For example, an HP up materia might give you 10% more maximum hit points on level 1 and 20% more maximum hit points on level 2. You can take a materia off of one character and give it to another, giving that character the benefits that the materia developed as it leveled up, while taking those benefits away, at least for the time being, from the previous character. In 1997, this system represented a crystallization of the previous two Final Fantasies' character development systems. In Final Fantasy V, you change jobs. Each job has its own skills. Level a skill up all the way, and you can equip it on your base class, effectively crafting unique characters. In Final Fantasy VI, you can equip each character with a sort of patron saint called a magicite. In addition to permanently teaching characters spells after they earn requisite skill points, the magicite also inform base level up stat percentages, making them necessarily a no messing around tolerated element of character progression. Final Fantasy VII embodied elements of both these systems in level-upable collectible trading card-like candy bubbles called materia. Add into the bargain weapons that have faster or slower materia growth rates, more slots or fewer slots, and linked slots that allow special blue materia to affect the connected materia, and you have yourself a pretty iconically robust skill progression system. Beats the heck out of a modern AAA skill tree. The materia system, however, reaps the majority of its spoils over the course of a full length of video game. The Final Fantasy VII Remake stops too early in the narrative, with too few weapons, armor pieces, accessories, and materia themselves available to players for it to possibly reach half of its full entertainment potential. Furthermore, materia becomes more of a didactic puzzle injection than a joyful sketchpad for game designing your own unique characters. Just look at how plain the menu is. It's like they want you to think of it as a part-time job task. Maybe they thought that making the materia menu look like Star Wars Extended Universe productivity software would make you take it for granted as a world-building element. Look at how uncomfortably left-aligned everything is. Look how the materia aren't even in any kind of alphabetical order. Why can't I have tabs to swap between green, yellow, purple, and blue materia? Well, probably because I would then see how few blue materia there even are in the game. Why can't I at least compose loadouts? The little gut check dialogue that stops me before I take materia off another party member is sort of a buzzkill when that party member isn't even in the party. It's like they wanted this menu to be boring. On the other hand, when you look at their attempt at a fun menu, you'll kind of wish you were just using Microsoft Excel. It's quite telling that they built this whole elaborate crystarium thing for each weapon in the game, only to also give you the option to just not use it. Give whoever implemented that auto mode a raise. Getting good at the game, however, does not make the materia menu more exciting. The better you get at the game, the more time you spend second-guessing your materia loadouts. I don't exactly like myself, so I counted every frame of materia menu fiddling across all 4 of my playthroughs. By the way, keep sending in your resumes, everybody. I am looking at all of them. In my research, I observed a 12% increase between my first and second playthroughs, and a 22% increase between my first and third playthroughs. That number decreased by 4% in my fourth playthrough. The better you get, the harder you think about materia. Meanwhile, In hard mode, I barely spent any time in the materia menu at all. This could either be because I had gotten sufficiently good at the game, or because hard mode is the real mode. I stop just short of saying that hard mode is objectively the real mode of the Final Fantasy VII Remake, though I do not hesitate to subjectively declare it. Hard mode is the real way to play the Final Fantasy VII Remake. Now, if you'll indulge me for just a few minutes, I would like to offer an attempt to prove the inverse of this hypothesis.
Their bomb threat has thrown our offices into chaos, let alone the reactor itself. It's total insanity!
I'm still thinking about the materia menu. I'm not saying they should have made it like a wild, fun minigame, like they should have contracted Compile to make a full-on Puyo. It's just, it lacks both fun and basic usability functions. Let me at least build decks. I mean, at its current state of usability, you might as well just make it look fun. As I noted a few minutes ago, the hand tips when you consider what the developers actually did make when they wanted to make a quote-unquote fun menu. This is a smoking gun clue. If we witness this for the game's duration with a mystery novel enthusiast's attention to detail, a pattern emerges. The designers don't even actually care about this stuff. It's been beating us over the head the whole time. Witness this. During one particularly narratively goofy segment of the game, we chase a sewer rat who has stolen a key. We stop along the chase path at several nodes to fight battles that this stupid rat gleefully spectates. Look at this here. While dramatic chase music pumps loud and hard, the rat we're chasing just stands and watches us heal. We might in the moment say this looks dopey, yet I, who long ago theorized that Japanese role-playing game developers just wanted to make Gears of War, cannot chastise the game for this. A role-playing game is more than just a video game where you can heal your dudes from a menu. A role-playing game is a game whose goal is to play a role. That I got to this point in my first playthrough in desperate need of healing is the fault of my bad acting, not the rat's. Thus I propose my hypothesis that, to me, it is crystal clear that these designers wanted to make an action game. Yes, my friends, we've gotten to the point. Again, imagine some fancy After Effects animation for this. And this is the part of the review where I say something that is somewhat universally interesting. If you find any of this interesting, you probably find this segment of each review to be the most interesting part. If there are any ice pick companies out there who would like to sponsor this segment of the show, I have situated my business inquiries email address into my Twitter profile. I do not live in the Great Gatsby's house, so you do not need to send me any ice picks. Just send me an SVG of your logo and some money. The point of this action button review of the Final Fantasy VII Remake involves us investigating and ruminating on a situation I call the Trinket Ultimatum. As Kirk Hamilton proposed once on the website Kotaku.com, video games are better the second time you play them. He was speaking about single-player games, though he'd be just as right about pretty much any game. Though he's twice as right about single prestige action games, because these games feature narratives and ask us, usually gently, to play the role of a character. When we know the script, we can play the role better. In this way, saying a video game is better the second time you play it is kind of like saying a film is better when the actors had rehearsed. Now, we could get philosophical and say that the permission to make meandering mistakes, experiment, and experience thrilling discoveries for yourself comprise a huge part of any good game's appeal. For the sake of argument, let's say that this thrill of discovery comprises 49% of a good game's appeal. I mentioned earlier in this review that in the Final Fantasy VII Remake, the player spends, and I'm quoting myself here, 46 minutes, 30 seconds, and 32 frames of a 100% complete playthrough of the game, departing from the correct path during a dungeon or corridor level to open a treasure chest containing an item that would be completely unusable in a hard mode playthrough, and then returning to the path. That's 3.41% of the playable game outside battles. I left out the fact that these departures from the clearly marked main paths through the Final Fantasy VII Remake's levels almost always require the player to ignore enormous theatrical cues. Final Fantasy VII's story involves relatable human characters in big, world-jeopardizing situations. Every level shoves a new crisis in our faces. In the vein of every AAA single-player prestige game since Call of Duty, our comrades voice act dramatic directions. We're meant to follow them as stuff crumbles and buildings blow up and our friend's life hangs in the balance somewhere inside the enemy citadel. As Jason Schreier pointed out in a post on Kotaku.com giving tips to new players of the Final Fantasy VII Remake, if you want items, you should simply ignore where your party members automatically go during action segments. In summary, undermine the painstakingly crafted drama to go the wrong way on purpose, and you'll get items. This casts a black light on several deep issues in modern single-player games in general, though the Final Fantasy VII Remake looks particularly grody. These smashable crates dispense potions like candy. These glowy trinket boxes sit at the ends of hallways of length considerable enough to hype up their contents, most often a higher-level magic restoring item. Return to the proper path from your trinket-snatching excursion, and your quizzical stationary buddies immediately begin sprinting again toward their urgent destination. The Final Fantasy VII Remake so severely conditions you, young and early, that departing from the path nets trinkets that when you finally do get yelled at for trying to go the clearly wrong way, you achieve empathy for a parent calling the principal to protest their child's report card. Yet you never stop. Chances are, by Chapter 5, you've learned to always go the wrong way, all the time, no matter how invested you are in the plot. When later you control Tifa or Barrett, it's jarring to see them depart from the path to scrounge for trinkets. I'm like, oh, that's weird. Barrett is usually in more of a hurry. Then I remember that, as always, the character I'm controlling is the only person in the story who knows they're in a video game. As you progress through the game, propelled by your Final Fantasy VII nostalgia as you may be, you will unconsciously develop the habit of already starting to rotate the camera away from the trinket before Cloud can even complete the getting animation. Your brain knows this is boring. Eventually, at the player's controlling requests, the screen-writtenly aloof, cool-headed hero-type Cloud Strife acquires the erratic, theatrical mannerisms of a histrionic kleptomaniac, begging for Mall Security's heaviest handcuffs. Even as you try to soak in the atmosphere, as you try to roleplay your slowest, most sword-backed mosey, trinkets sing from the deep, ruining the mood. Even at the dramatic crescendo of the game, as the path forward could not possibly be any more apparent and glittery, you might find that perfunctorily your curiosity compels you to camera check your corners for tchotchke pockets. In my third playthrough, in which I simulated the restrictions of hard mode as best I could, I still departed from the path to obtain items most of the time. Old habits died hard. Usually it's a potion or a magic restorative item. You can't use any of these items in hard mode. In my simulated hard mode playthrough, I had the maximum of 99 potions, 6 hours into the game. In my actual hard mode playthrough, my dudes already had all of the best materia and weapons. I was able to follow the dramatically correct path through the game at a pace that felt genuinely more exciting. 3.41% of the game experience may not sound like much, though these little departures are spread so evenly, scattered so matter-of-factly, and splintered so joylessly throughout the main path of the game that I can't help considering them a smoking gun, like the weird ugly weapon upgrade menu's audacity to have an auto option, or the weird little game system stump wherein specific vending machines sell a limited stock of a couple of powerful items at a discounted price. The designers of this game did not care about any of that stuff. Hard mode is the quote-unquote correct way to play the Final Fantasy VII Remake. In hard mode, you equip your pre-grinded dudes and gals with the hottest pre-obtained equipment and pre-maxed materia, and you one-credit arcade blast your way through the story. You don't fiddle around in menus any more than you have to. You don't even really diverge from a commonsensical loadout rubric. You play characters close to their strengths. You heal during battle using ATB as an infinitely immediate term farmable in-battle consumable currency, shifting the overarching game's puzzle-solving paradigm toward immediate mundane game-breaking so you can get on with the breezy action. Just look at how few of the game's scripted battles happen inside arenas exhibiting any interest in the level design geometry. The in-game contextualized grinding machine, the Shinra Battle Simulator, tips the hand. First of all, it costs money to challenge a battle, meaning the designers think the battles are fun enough to charge you in-game currency for them. Second, it lays bare the enjoyability and balance of so many diverse enemy encounters, even within the clean slate level design of a White Room. Having said that, the absolute best series of battles in the whole game occurs in Chapter 15, as our heroes run down a straight corridor with no side branches, one battle leading seamlessly into another, forcing us to conduct our healing on the clock, expending ATB charges to do so. For a brief 4-minute stretch, the normal mode player experiences the thrill of the hard mode player. Some of the worst battles are the ones where the combat designers seemed obliviously unaware of the geometry in which the battle would take place. Cloud and Tifa versus Helitroopers might be fun in Shinra Battle Simulator's White Room, though in this level design, where the Helitroopers immediately turtle out unreachably over the ledge, it's soul-crushing. Any idiot-tier enemy that forces someone to use magic or die of boredom feels dirty, especially on normal mode. My second and third normal mode playthroughs saw me using minimal and then no items. I even challenged myself to heal using only prayer and chakra, and skip benches for several chapters. In hard mode, battle is the medicine, and the game struck me as astronomically more enjoyable this way. I felt a bristle's breadth away from scientific proof that the designers would rather have made an action game, and that all the glittery trinkets represented fear. These baubles exist merely to slake the bric-a-brac thirst of that phantom, the RPG fan. I postulate that, way back when, we were never, quote-unquote, RPG fans. We were fans of games with more. Hard mode's forced reliance on ATB abilities feels like a clue that its designers considered MP, magic points, a concession to nostalgia. This results in my imagining an alternative Final Fantasy VII Remake with all the design soul of a Bravely Default, a game where all abilities are things the player can save up for, pay for, and cash out on all within the moment of a battle. Tifa's unbridled strength ability, and Barrett's Gears of War-like active reload overcharge charging animation cancel at the end of a firing burst are signposts toward this otherwise invisible, much better video game. Even the throwaway minigame, Chapter 8 and 14's Whack-A-Box, exists seemingly merely to teach you the value of quickly and economically managing your ATB. I hypothesize that the designers wanted to make a game that did not have trinkets, hence hard mode not even allowing items. This makes me wonder, are games without trinkets, without crafting and such, even viable today? Why do AAA game likers equate has-friendly zones with needs trinkets? This tendency has put us at a disease. The Final Fantasy VII Remake wants, deep down, to be Final Fantasy VII the arcade game. Therefore, hard mode begs us to play it this way. Max out, hack up, load out, get down, and beeline through each chapter with the urgency the narrative demands. If you ask me, I think they should have just included a maxed stat, all weapons, all materia hard mode on the title screen alongside normal mode and easy mode. How's that for a devil's advocation of the whole there should be an easy mode in Dark Souls movement? With hard mode, they've laid the stats bare. Stats are nonsense. Grinding is nonsense. Yet, in order to even touch hard mode, you need to have played normal mode. They can't simply put a no stats necessary, all equipment unlocked, materia buffet hard mode on the title screen alongside normal mode and easy mode, because that undermines the so very role-playing game-like grinding experience that the hypothetical consumer will riot without. In the Final Fantasy VII Remake's abundant trinket excursions, I glimpse the looming specter of Final Fantasy XIII and Final Fantasy XV. The makers fear those old complaints. The makers fear not feeling sufficiently like a real RPG. So they ballooned the game with junior crewy moments like Red 13 flipping switches and Tifa's Kindergarten Uncharted to inflate the illusion of grandeur. The result is a game possessive of both the prestige moments we laud in an Uncharted and the trinkety RPG nonsense we acquired a sweet taste for back when we should have been getting our Stockholm Syndrome vaccinations. I don't speak for everybody though. Here's what I say. Kill trinkets. Just make an action game. I personally would gladly partake of it because of, not in spite of, the presence of enormous friendly zones. Then design that Tomb Raider-y part a lot better, and then make more like that. Just make a prestige game. Or, and this is just me, maybe just design a balanced and finished normal mode in which trinkets and magic spells alike are intelligently valuable, where my AI party members have at least Donald and Goofy level programmable paradigms, and maybe make some optional side quests that are great, and then don't even have a hard mode or an easy mode. In summary, no, Dark Souls should not have an easy mode. No game should have a hard mode or an easy mode. The perfect video game will not need any difficulty modes. And that's the straight dope. As my friend Gita Jackson has said, Twitter becomes a much different website around the time you accumulate your 10,000th follower. I myself have noted that this phenomenon duplicates for every additional 10,000 followers. I could delve deeper into the exact nature of the change that occurs in the Twitter user experience. However, this thing has gone on long enough, and it is time to end it. So I'll speak instead on what effect my increasing Twitter following has had on me personally. I'll just say this: I have become very good at detecting deceptively rhetorical questions. For example, most of the people in my Twitter DMs who have asked me, should I play the Final Fantasy VII Remake, do not actually want to play the Final Fantasy VII Remake. You see, we humans, like dogs, usually speak just to say something. We join a conversation just to be in a conversation. And for a few short weeks, the conversation concerned the Final Fantasy VII Remake. Those of you who asked a more detailed version of that question were largely sincere. Should you play the original Final Fantasy VII before you play the Final Fantasy VII Remake? Sure. Should you play the original Final Fantasy VII or the Final Fantasy VII Remake, I'd say play the original and then play the remake if you really love the original. Though that bald-faced rhetorical version of the question still inspires me. Should you play the Final Fantasy VII Remake? These people, again, most of whom probably do not expect or even want an answer, perhaps on accident, present the Final Fantasy VII Remake as existing in a vacuum. So we come back to that question I asked at the beginning of today's program. Can we talk about a video game without talking about other video games? In this brief section, I'd like to give it a shot. First, my girlfriend does not know the twist of Final Fantasy VII. While I played through the remake, she began playing through the original on her Nintendo Switch Lite in several minutes-long bursts over the course of every day. Knowing that I quarantinedly occupy the same small apartment with a person who does not know the twist of Final Fantasy VII has been slowly breaking my mind. She's never even played a Final Fantasy game. She's never even played a complete Japanese role-playing game. Every observation about the original Final Fantasy VII that she offers to me feels like it fell to the earth from space.
I love it.
It's also given me a nifty lens for assessing the remake. In experiencing her opinion of the original freshly, I've been able to quietly assess the remake's potential as an all-timer. Furthermore, I've started this series to exclusively review all-timers. I picked the Final Fantasy VII Remake for the first review in this series because it felt like a good publicity opportunity for me to demonstrate my methods, hopefully resulting in increased Patreon revenue, which will allow me to hire 2 full-time video editors so that I can make these things bigger and faster. Putting aside the illness of the omen that I am launching this video series from an angle perfectly opposed to that which I promised, I ask myself, as I write this, not as I read it into a microphone in front of a camera later, could I convince someone that the Final Fantasy VII Remake is an all-timer? Right about now, in all of my upcoming reviews, I will feature a section called Take It Away. In that section, I'll briefly summarize the absolutely crucial value and the brutally important objects of study that the game in question presents to anyone wanting to get to know video games better. This time, I got nothing. I did not arrive at the end of my critical analysis of the Final Fantasy VII Remake with any essential takeaways. It is, unfortunately, not an all-timer. On the other hand, I did love every moment of my first playthrough. Like I said before, I drank it with a milkshake straw. So in the spirit of sportspersonship, allow me to hazard my best attempt at boiling down the essential enjoyability value of the Final Fantasy VII Remake. What strikes me most, looking back at all my time with the Final Fantasy VII Remake, is its obsessive determination to perhaps accidentally replicate the exact structural texture of a PlayStation 1 game. I recognize this as a thin, icy compliment to pay any game, though sincerely, the Final Fantasy VII Remake pulls off weird old-fashionedness as remarkably well as anyone probably can. The game's ambitious bag contains parts and systems that don't usually belong together. Here we have an experience as genre-stretching as Deadly Premonition or Shenmue, only without the impression of budgetary constraints or unfinishedness. An experience sort of like a Yakuza game, yet in a morbidly rich fantasy setting with, actually, far less conventional a plot outline. If you ask me from the midst of an actual vacuum whether you should play the Final Fantasy VII Remake or not, my answer is, I don't know. I don't live in a vacuum, and not for lack of trying either. I think that the Final Fantasy VII Remake is well written, though how much of the dialogue am I accepting because I already like the characters? I love Aerith, and I consider her one of the best written video game characters of all time, though Can I recommend this game on the basis of her presence to someone who doesn't know the full story? I consider the plot of the original Final Fantasy VII superlatively well-paced. I find its big emotional beats remarkably well-positioned. Its peculiar use of interactive flashbacks is a hallmark of video game narrative design. However, most of that stuff isn't in the remake, which has done its best to replicate the pacing of the entire original game within an exploded fraction of its plot. I cannot in good faith recommend the Final Fantasy VII Remake on the basis of its plot if what I care about as regards the plot requires me to have played the original game 23 years ago. I could tell you that the weapons feel good. The main character's big sword feels good. Triple Slash feels hot wherever you're from. Even the crash of the Braver attack hitting the ground when it just misses is satisfying. The freeze frames when changing characters, the heavy, sticky thump of stop-start when the guy with a gun for an arm lets out an overcharge burst. It's all crunchy and delicious. Final Fantasy VII Remake has studied the best action games' visual intensity amplification frictions. Though what does that mean if you don't play video games? I can't recommend the Final Fantasy VII Remake to a person who has never played a video game before. On the other hand, if you've played some prestige video games, if maybe your first console was a PlayStation 3, and your first game was Uncharted, and you've played most of the big hits since then, I recommend this game on the basis of its historical curiosity, its flow to and from game flavors, its brazen effortlessness in once going 2 whole hours without any combat, and frequently going more than 1 hour without combat creates an experience of inimitable texture. There's a part where you fight a house, and then later in town you overhear one guy telling another guy who looks like David Foster Wallace about it. And the guy who looks like David Foster Wallace incredulously asks, "He fought a house?" Of course, the Final Fantasy VII Remake only gets away with any of this because of its direct connection to the original Final Fantasy VII, one of the biggest selling games of all time. To play this game is to glimpse a kaleidoscope of narrative and structural possibilities that lay outside the feasibility of the typical AAA game studio. Many excellent examples of this textural inimitability come to mind. For example, you can summon mythical beasts to help you in battle. How do you do this? Well, they show up when they feel like it. Try pitching that to an executive at Electronic Arts. There's a late-game boss named Rufus. You don't need to know who he is. All you need to know is that you can put him to sleep using the sleep spell. The game does not explicitly tell you this. At the time you meet Rufus, you might have had the sleep spell for dozens of hours and never used it. Maybe you tried it on an enemy grunt at one point and it didn't work. Well, it works on Rufus. You can put Rufus to sleep and then completely trash him in like 16 seconds. I've done it. It's hilarious. He deserves it. How are you supposed to know that you can do this? Well, similarly, one character has a weapon you can only get by stealing it from a boss, which you only fight once. And then, immediately after you get this weapon, you can use it in exactly one inconsequential battle before the character it belongs to leaves the party for a period of several hours. And the next time you get that character back in your party, you find a new weapon for them 11 minutes before you can even control them in a battle again. I mean, technically in the Final Fantasy VII Remake, every weapon for a character has its own strengths and weaknesses. It's not a linear progression. You're supposed to mix and match and personalize your loadout as the situation demands. Also, you can play through the whole game with that stolen weapon in New Game Plus, though if you take this at face value, it's pretty bizarre. The Final Fantasy VII Remake luxuriously sponge bathes your brain with the gloppy textured soap slop of full-color glossy instruction manual game design. This is not the structure of a quote-unquote normal AAA prestige video game. Then again, Final Fantasy VII was never exactly a weird game. The PlayStation 1 library is bursting full of experimental, weird, artistic video games, most of them Japanese. Final Fantasy VII was never really one of them. Even at its most experimental and interesting moments, it never broke any particular mold. However, if you wanted to see the modern AAA prestige video game budget taffy stretched and contortionist bent into the weirdest shape we have yet seen, look no further than the Final Fantasy VII Remake. Or Death Stranding, though that is a lower budget game, and the Final Fantasy VII Remake is conventionally a bit more fun. And so we've arrived at the last disc. In the spirit of the original Final Fantasy VII, I have made sure that this last disc includes less than 5% of the review's total substance. I said earlier that it's not possible for me to talk about this game without spoiling its ending. So in this section, I'd like to talk about the ending of the game. If you've been avoiding spoilers and would like to keep doing so, I have on-screen indicated a timestamp for you to skip to. Spoiler number 1. The credits are exactly 17 minutes, 56 seconds, and 54 frames long. Spoiler number 2. I probably shouldn't have finally started watching the HBO series The Leftovers a few days before I started playing the Final Fantasy VII Remake. In The Leftovers, the former Doctor Who actor Christopher Eccleston plays a small-town preacher. Seeing Christopher Eccleston in a church made me think of the 2005 Doctor Who episode Father's Day, which also involves a church. In this episode, the Doctor's companion accidentally changes something that happened in the past. I think she saves her dad from dying in a car accident, incurring the wrath of a species of ghostly alien pterodactyl creatures called the Reapers. The Reapers are arbiters of time. They make sure destiny stays on its course. So, when I saw the weird ghosts swirling around Aerith at the beginning of the Final Fantasy VII Remake, and I thought, well, those weren't there before. And she told Cloud that the flower she gave him is the sort of flower that lovers give each other when they're reunited. I accidentally remembering that dumb Doctor Who episode while watching The Leftovers a few days before, and I think I spoiled the whole game for myself. It turns out that the weird ghosts called Whispers actually are arbiters of fate. Someone involved in this story, probably Aerith, has engaged in a little bit of insider trading with the future, and the Whispers are the SEC come to shut them down. By the end of the game, it has been made sledgehammeringly clear that what you just played was not a remake of Final Fantasy VII, it was a sequel to Final Fantasy VII. In the final encounter, you destroy the Arbiters of Fate, freeing yourself to forge your own destiny. In other words, the title is not pronounced The Final Fantasy VII Remake. It's pronounced The Final Fantasy VII Remake. It's a verb, not a noun. Ever since the game came out, people have been filling my various inboxes with expressions of hope to get my take. Now that it's been several weeks and the YouTubers have had their way with it, I can deliver my take the way my local Domino's Pizza delivers pizza. Personally, I love it. I hope they flat out call the next one Final Fantasy VII 3. I didn't love it at first. Then I played the game again. I didn't do any deep soul searching to get where I wound up. I just got here. I've seen a lot of bad opinions comparing the ending of the game to Kingdom Hearts, though seriously, Kingdom Hearts is not that complicated. And also, Kingdom Hearts owns. These weird ghosts, whom the game calls Whispers, show up at moments when the story diverges or is about to diverge from the original Final Fantasy VII narrative. The Whispers' most remarkably dramatic appearance occurs at the end of Chapter 4, after the player just finished experiencing a huge deep dive into the side character Jessie, a deep dive not present in any form in the original game. The Whispers later stop Cloud from killing Reno. They stop Jessie from throwing the grenade that winds up killing her. They revive Barrett after Sephiroth upsettingly kills him. The Whispers simply will not tolerate any big or small changes to Final Fantasy VII's sacred plot. Their indignant fury gradually grows such that by the end of the game, they have congealed and conglomerated into a shrieking mass that our party members must fight and kill in order to liberate themselves from fate, both literally and symbolically. The Whispers are very clearly a stand-in for the Final Fantasy VII fan community. As such, they represent a time-travelerly sleight of hand on the part of the writers and designers, a magic trick these particular video game developers will only ever be able to pull off once. The Final Fantasy VII Remake's creatives have foreseen every possible form of fan backlash. However, rather than focus test their way through a psychic minefield, they turned that precognition into a metaphor and sprinted with it. This is the sort of joke Orson Welles would have perpetrated if he'd been born 50 years later. With Final Fantasy VII fans on high alert as of this perpetration of what many of them consider to be a punking, I don't doubt that Final Fantasy VII-3 will stick remarkably close to the original game's plot beats for at least half of its running time. After that, I personally don't care where it goes. They can go to the moon for all I care. I'm gonna say this as plainly as I can. I trust Tetsuya Nomura. I trust Tetsuya Nomura to point me personally toward a good time. Tetsuya Nomura isn't just an artist and a video game director. I consider him a fashion designer. I feel duty-bound from a past life to support the narrative choices of fashion designers. For example, I saw both Tom Ford films in the theater twice. The reason I say I can't talk about this game without discussing its ending, unfortunately, isn't that exciting. It's just this, that I might not have actually wanted to replay the game if it had not ended the way it did. Hearing Cloud call Sephiroth a butthole before a limit break during the final battle filled me with a hot fury, casting a rosy glow backward upon the whole experience. And if the whole story is about someone reliving something they already lived, how are you not gonna play that twice? That's probably why they made hard mode the way they did. Early in Chapter 9, Chocobo Sam tells Cloud and Aerith he'll give them the MacGuffin they need if they can properly guess the result of his coin toss. On my first playthrough, I guessed tails. It came up heads. Knowing from ancient experience that the tiniest dialogue choices matter in Wall Market, I reloaded a recent save. I guessed heads. The result astounded me. Chocobo Sam showed me the exact same side of the coin he had shown me before. It clearly depicted a chocobo's head. He called it tails. What would Rosencrantz and Guildenstern say to this? Reflecting on this now, I wonder if gaming's big spoiler is still going to happen in Part 2, just because everyone is now seeming to think it might not. Thinking about Chocobo Sam, I realize that the Final Fantasy VII Remake is saying that when it comes to fate, heads and tails are whatever the game designer says they are. Well, that's the end of my spoiler section, and now it's time for the bottom line. The Final Fantasy VII Remake is more Final Fantasy VII than Final Fantasy VII. The Final Fantasy VII Remake is an obsessive revisiting of one of the most famous classic video games in history, and an elaborate, sprawling thesis contemplating the very nature of a remake. It's a weird, bubbly burger bucket of gloppy-textured PlayStation 1 narrative structure with inimitable pacing and solid combat mechanics. It is also an engine for its own sequels. To play this game is to be constantly aware that it will end on a cliffhanger, and you will have to deal with that when it does. Here and there throughout the game, little stubby flourishes of design systematic baroqueness point the way toward a bigger, longer, vaster, open-worldlier sequel. For example, early in the game, there's an item shop whose owner needs you to kill a rat. When you kill the rat, he expresses his thanks by offering you a discount. Then, NPCs all around town will occasionally, randomly exclaim, "Glad we no longer have a rat problem."
Glad we no longer have a rat problem.
Glad we no longer have a rat problem.
No future side quest results in discounts at a shop, or such specific NPC utterances. I only noticed this and drilled my brain down on it the second time I played through the game. It made me feel a little bit sad. It made me remember that this game once existed only as a figment of the collective imaginations of video game forum dwellers at the turn of this century. Then it existed as a sort of pejorative. It evolved into a philosophical nightmare. Then its makers accepted the philosophical nightmare and faced it. This long-yearned-for multimedia product became a promised possibility. And then we waited. During that wait, it somehow felt less possible than it had before its official announcement. Today, the Final Fantasy VII Remake is real, and I have devoured it. And then on another go-round, I hear an NPC yell, "Glad we no longer have a rat problem."
Glad we no longer have a rat problem.
And it makes me remember that I have no idea when the next game in this series is going to exist. If you've never played the original Final Fantasy VII and have no interest in doing so, maybe the Final Fantasy VII Remake will make you feel welcome to some club or another. Then again, I can't exactly know what it feels like to not have played the original Final Fantasy VII as an 18-year-old in 1997. And you know what? Maybe I don't have to. I don't have to have not played Final Fantasy VII in 1997, and you don't have to have played Final Fantasy VII in 1997 in order to think that this 2-second moment wherein Cloud hits his sword on a doorframe is funny. It just is. As I reach the end of this review, I can't help thinking about Chapter 4. Chapter 4 consists of new material, fleshing out a previously paper-thin character, and introducing a new antagonist. That mission felt like DLC, like the best possible DLC. It made me feel like the world of Final Fantasy VII had always been real, and that now I was going back to it and looking at it again with more adult concerns. Overall, this game did a phenomenal job of making its relatable characters feel like people despite the escalating bizarreness of all surrounding situations. For example, late in the game, our mission takes us to a men's bathroom in a corporate skyscraper. Barrett, Tifa, and Cloud have detonated explosives and been responsible or responsibility adjacent for the deaths of many innocent people at this point in the story. They had to kill dozens of security guards to get where they are right now. Yet, despite her brazen involvement in mass murder, what unsettles Tifa now is the thought of a man walking in and seeing a woman in the men's bathroom.
So, can I go with you? Don't want to be here any longer than I have to.
Yeah, sure.
Any professional scrutinizer of screenwriting should have an aneurysm at this point. On the other hand, I love it. I keep hearing Tifa in my head.
Would kill for a shower. Would kill for a shower.
When she takes a particularly brutal attack that knocks her flailing into the air before even reaching the top of her flight arc, as the hideous impact sound effect has just barely begun to fade, she with immediacy shrieks,
That's enough!
I'll be fine.
Fuck on me!
I'll be fine.
"I'll be fine."
I'll be fine.
I always say, if nobody asked, you're probably not telling the truth. Similarly, Barrett hyper-often quips upon receiving brutal, mortal impaling damage from one 10-story, 60-ton, cosmic horrible freak fiend or another.
Kiss mine! I've lived through worse. I've lived through worse.
I've lived through worse.
I've lived through worse.
Has he, though? What has this man been through? Can we get a Barrett prequel game? because that'd shock the shoes off of Gears of War. I'd play that game. I've played Dirge of Cerberus twice, simply because it starred Final Fantasy VII's Vincent Valentine. I know exactly what Square Enix thinks a shooting game is, and I would still pay money for a shooter starring the Final Fantasy VII Remake's Barrett Wallace. At this point in my life, I'd have to play any game involving these characters. They have been with me for literally most of my life. I will play the worst DLC. I will play the most terrible spin-offs. You definitely shouldn't listen to anything I have to say about the Final Fantasy VII Remake. Wow. I should have said that at the beginning of this video. I could have saved you a lot of time. Oh well, as I always say, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that video games are created awesome, that I was born stupid. However, I will not die hungry. Video games forever. Action button. Well, that's the end of the video. Thank you for watching the whole thing, or if you skipped to the end, thank you for skipping to the end. I don't know what you expected here at the end of the video, though thanks. I know it's a long video, however, it's the first video that I posted on my channel, and I wanted to make sure it was a big one. I wanted to make sure it contained a little bit, or even a lot, of everything that I want to do on this channel. That's why it's so big. If I had unlimited resources, wild amounts of resources, that I could hire a whole bunch of people, I would want to do that every month. However, I'm not going to do that every month. I'm going to do slightly less. I would die if I tried to do that again. So the next game I'm doing is The Last of Us, because I realized while reviewing the Final Fantasy VII Remake, I said about 1,000,000 times in that video that it's the worst possible game to review. You know what? I think it was actually a pretty good game to review, because it's not a great game. I loved it. It's not a great game. A lot of it's not even good. So I had a good time picking it apart, and it gave me this different concept, this different relationship with the greatness that I would like to define in the other games that I review on this series. So that's good. My God, I'm just thinking about the video. I just finished editing the video about 15 minutes ago, so I'm sitting here just thinking footage that I could have used in the video that I didn't use. I woke up in the middle of the night one night and I thought, I don't have good footage of Cloud climbing the stairs at Shinra Tower with the Buster Sword on his back. So I like captured that, which meant I had to go through Tifa's Uncharted thing again for like the sixth time. I'll tell you what, I hate that part. I got the stair footage and then I didn't even use it. So maybe I will just have the stair footage over here. Maybe it's been displaying this whole time that I'm talking. I wanted to thank a couple of people before this video is over. I wanted to thank, first of all, anyone who's backing me on Patreon. That's incredible. When I put that Patreon up, I was in the middle of talking to editors at various publications. I was talking to like 8 different people about possibly contributing freelance articles or videos. I thought that the Patreon was just going to be one of like the 6 things I was doing every month. Somehow it has turned into a full-time job, which is incredible. Thanks for the full-time job. Thanks in particular to Josh Watson, who sent me this microphone, boosted discord.gg/action button. He was a server booster before there was even a Patreon. He believed in me, and it was very encouraging. He continued to believe in me so much that he edited the battle sequence of this video, the chapter 4, disc 4. Sorry, the disc name is kind of dumb. I admit it's a stupid gimmick. He lined up the footage in there, and he asked if he could help, and I gave him the most meticulously difficult, weirdest one to do. So he did it, and that's incredible to me. The footage was very specific. It needed very specific footage. I did a little bit of editing on it as well. Let's see if you can see which parts were mine. I also want to say thank you to Travis Gafford, who through Alienware got me this beautiful PC that I used to edit this computer. I'm not sure if it's really a good one. It's got the Ryzen the 16 core, and it's like a 2080 Ti. Is that a good one? 64 gigabytes of RAM. Is that a lot? I'm joking. No, really, I'm not joking. I'm not a computer guy. That's a joke. I am a computer guy. This computer's pretty good. Every time I edit a video, I force myself to make it weirder and harder and stranger, and I force myself to learn new things and just throw new stuff in there. So this computer helped me make this job very difficult for myself. And also, in between the time that I launched the Patreon and now, I got this chair. I ordered this chair in March. I ordered this microphone windscreen in March, and nothing ever showed up. I ordered it from Amazon, didn't show up. Ordered it from Sweetwater, didn't show up. Ordered it from B&H Photo, showed up. So B&H Photo, Pride of Manhattan, thank you. I also got these lights. You see these lights? I don't even have them really set up because I ain't no cinematographer. Is that what they call it? I ain't one of those. I can probably pretend to be one later. See, this mustache is, it's not on purpose. I tried to shave, the water went cold. I cut my neck. What was I even talking about? I want to say thank you to a bunch of YouTubers, some of whom don't even know me. The Digital Foundry, Game Maker's Toolkit, Happy Console Gamer, Night Sky Prince. I love watching those channels. Some of them don't know that I exist, probably, though. I like those guys, and they made me think while I'm sitting at my job. I'm like, maybe I can make a brand and make content on the internet. Maybe I can try that. And then I didn't. And then I launched that Patreon while very, very ill with the coronavirus. I launched the Patreon just to give myself... See, I still can't breathe. I'm sorry. You might have heard me breathing a lot more through my mouth in that video than I've ever breathed through my mouth in previous videos. I'm sorry about that. I'm sorry. I was very sick, and I'm just like, I'm gonna make a Patreon. I wrote that Patreon pitch on my phone, in my bed, while sick, humidifier on. And it's wild that you all are enabling me to do this very ridiculous thing that I've decided to do. Oh, well. Anyway, I believe I owe some Patreon shout-outs to people on here. I believe I'm duty bound. I'm required by law to shout you out. So I'm going to look at the screen and then I'm going to read it into the camera and I'm going to edit out the looking at the screen so that you think I'm doing it off the top of my head. So here we go. Justin Skomarovsky, Josh Watson, Golok, I think it's pronounced Golok, Jacob Gillespie, Tess Smith, Woody Jang, John Herbrand, Astrolad, Bernard Kinkius, Red Muffler Man, Reza Saranatai. I know you stole my glasses. I have 4 pairs of those. I don't know, did you get one of them or did you buy them elsewhere? The Laser Girls, Joshua Jarvis, Antonovus, Matthew Dumont, Dave Brown, Sam G, James Schrader, or Schroeder. Sorry, my glasses are, I can only see the shapes of words. James Schroeder, James Schrader. Thank you. Christopher Lobey, David Langstaff, Jacob, David Shaw, Nate, Mimsy. I would like to thank Mimsy for helping me color correct the game footage that my Elgato Game Capture HD 60S Plus had the footage all washed out. It looked weird. So she color matched it to the official trailers of the game. Thank you for doing that, Mimsy. Mimsy's in the other room. I don't know if she heard me. Oh, she just said that she did hear me. Oh, that's creepy. Stop listening to me record my video. That's a joke. Ryan Lang, Keith Miller, Stephen Taylor. Sorry, is that Stephen or... I don't have my glasses on. Stephen Taylor. The Coconut Kid. Jonathan Longnecker. I'm just holding this lip balm. Why am I doing that? That looks weird. Scott Olsen Morales. Dario Bertagna. Kenny Carranza. Ranger Mankin. Seth Carlson. Charles Schultz. Not Charles Schulz, the creator of Peanuts. He wouldn't back this Patreon with a 10-foot pole. Sarah Sophia. Or Sophia. Jacob Gillespie. Oh wait, it's wrapped around. It's wrapped around. I can just, I guess I owe everybody 2 shout-outs. Well, I'll just duplicate this. Just watch it twice. I'll shout you out again next time. You know, I've been having some difficulty with the audio here. Hardware, software, everything's just driving me wild. And I hope the audio is good on this one. My hair looked okay when I started this. Now I'm sweating under the hot lights. My Elgato key light is, it's not actually a hot light. No, they're not hot. They don't create any temperature at all. In my day, lights were hot. Well, that's all I got time for today. By which I mean I just spent 150 hours editing this thing and 200 hours researching it. So it's kind of, I don't know. I like my steel case gesture chair headrest. Look at this. It's like being at the dentist. I want to thank the Heck Yeah Babies for giving me a TV when my TV broke. My TV broke. And, oh my god. That was really loud. And, the Heck Yeah Babies gave me a TV. They brought me a TV. Beautiful. Thank you very much for that. And I want to thank Alistair for arranging to have his old Steelcase Leap chair delivered here the day before my chair that I had paid for arrived. So now Mimsy's got your chair, and it's wonderful. We've got 2 wonderful chairs in here. That's great. I wanted to thank Jermaine for his Twitch chat comment where he said Tifa looked like a Final Fantasy cosplayer, because that inspired me to write the line about Tifa looks like exactly what she is, a cosplay, winner of a Square Enix sponsored Final Fantasy VII cosplay contest. I thought that was funny. I mean, that entertained me. So thanks for giving me that and letting me steal it from you. That's all I have time for. I don't have time for any more. Check me out. I'll see you next time. Stay tuned. Hey guys, is that the latest hey guys ever in a YouTube video? Stay tuned. I'm a little bit loopy. I've been up for a very long time. What was I saying? Stay tuned. Check me out. Tune in to twitch.tv/actionbutton where I'll be streaming some fun games in the upcoming days. I'm going to start a podcast soon. SoundCloud.com/actionbutton will be one of the ways to listen to it. Discord.gg/actionbutton. Patreon.com/actionbutton. Basically action button on all this stuff except this YouTube channel because I don't have a custom URL yet. Hopefully I can get one at some point. Someday. Here's what I want to leave you with. I want to leave you with this montage that everybody thumbs ups in the Final Fantasy VII Remake, and they all thumbs up really weird. I started to make a montage of every thumbs up in a cutscene in the Final Fantasy VII Remake. Started to make a montage, and then I was like, my God, what am I doing? I'm in the middle of editing this video, and I just started off the top of my head trying to grab as many thumbs ups as I could. I mentioned it to Josh Watson in the Discord. He went and made it. He went and just made a montage of every thumbs up in the game. Now, I haven't counted them. I was going to count them and give you all a number. I could put numbers on the screen. I'm not even going to put numbers on the screen. I'm just going to put it up, count along at home. I'll put some fun music under it. We can just watch. That's how we'll send this thing off, with a little thumbs up montage of every thumbs. So I'm going to send you off with a thumbs up montage. Thanks for watching. Oh, and also, please remake Final Fantasy VI for the PlayStation 5. Thank you.